Select Committee. Mr. Straker, you're going to continue?
Thank you very much, sir. And Mr. Thine has taken his position next to me, and I'll ask, sir, for A10682 to be screened. And just whilst that's coming on, Mr. Thine can introduce himself to the committee.
Thank you very much. Morning, committee. Firstly, Mr. Straker, thank you for getting my name right. Just 3 attempts yesterday. Finally got there. Ian Thine, London Borough of Hillingdon. I'm the Principal Sustainability Officer, which basically means I'm the odd job man, so as you once pointed out. So I've been working on HS2 for the last 4 or 5 years, sort of lived and breathed the project. So, and in that time I've been working with a variety of different partners, stakeholders and the residents. So I consider myself to be fairly well informed of the project.
Thank you very much. And on that slide 10682 we can see what it is you're going to do within the evidence you're presenting to the committee. And on 10683 we can just observe, can we there, the area through which HS2 is proposing to pass within the London Borough of Hillingdon.
That's correct. And committee, if I may just take a moment, I know there are a fair few slides here, and there's good reason for that, because there's quite a story to tell in this borough. In effect, what you see here is an amalgamation of a lot of construction impacts being unloaded within our borough, largely within the Greenbelt area, and for that reason, there's quite a few bits and pieces that need to go alongside that. Hence the amount of slides. But I will try and get through them as quickly as I possibly can.
Thank you. Well, then if we just pass over to 10684, because there you've indicated the various wards, I think, and give their population. And those boxes plainly are not intended to represent the boundaries to the wards, but simply to be a way in which one can pick out the population figures for each of the wards.
That's correct. And the important point about this slide is, sir, that the area shown by that construction boundary, this isn't in the back end of beyond impacting just small villages. There are tens of thousands of people who will be impacted to some extent by these proposals, and that's why there's quite a story to tell. It's not just a simple scheme affecting a couple of villages. This is big.
And then
This is the area where there's the greatest population around the railway.
Without having looked all the way out there, but yes, I would have thought so. In terms of the construction impacts, I would have thought outside of the major stations, this is, and certainly possibly the only place along the route, so where there are no benefits, where you get all the impacts. Another crucial point.
And then if we just turn to 10685, there's a slide headed the construction impacts.
That's correct.
And we can note on that, can't we, there are various matters, once again without reference to the particular siting, where you've recorded various impacts which arise in consequence of construction.
That's correct.
Running through from the left, viaduct construction through to utility diversions on the right, and including material dumps and so forth. Now, just so the committee gets some idea of the sequence here, you've told us, Mr. Thine, how your involvement has been long-standing, and the position as far as Hillingdon is concerned, referable to those impacts that we see there. Has that one been of consistently seeking a tunnel?
Yes, right from the outset. We initially the scheme included surface section throughout Ruislip, and then obviously the surface section as we see it here today. The section through Ruislip is now tunnelled, and after, on the face of it, it's an obvious decision to have made. And here as soon as that was tunnelled, we still made the point that the tunnel should have been extended. It's not simply about picking on green fields and plonking construction material in it. There's a whole host of effects that have gone with this that subsequently we now know about from the environmental statement. And the only sensible solution for those thousands of people is a tunnel, and that case was made right from day one.
How much additional tunnelling was added prior to the second reading?
Racking my memory, I think it was about 4 or 5 kilometres from one end of Rice to the other. I'm sure the guys from HS2 will give me a detailed figure, but it was along those lines.
The clerk says it was 6.
Sorry, just to correct that, it wasn't after second reading.
Wasn't it?
This was a...
Is the TV back working? Is it all working? Okay. All right. Most exciting moment of the committee so far. Order. Let's start again. Sorry, Mr. Mould, you were saying...
Yes, I was just saying that the change, the scheme, the introduction of a tunnel terminating at the Northolt portal in Ruislip came before the bill was introduced into Parliament. It was a major change to the design that took place during the preparation of the scheme for the bill.
Okay.
Thank
Carry
you.
on, Mr. Drake.
Thank you very much. I just want to backtrack a moment or two. We've got that point, and we've seen these construction impacts on 10685, and you've mentioned throughout that the London Borough of Hillingdon was seeking a tunnel.
Correct.
And I want just to touch upon, before we go off on a point which we need to look at, the question of the collaboration which London Borough of Hillingdon has had with both neighbouring authorities and other public bodies.
So since we asked for the tunnel, sir, it was evident that we weren't going to get the information required from HS2 Limited. As we said, we made the request for the tunnel extension right from the start, and we only finally got some form of output from HS2 Limited towards the middle of last year. So we obviously set about trying to understand whether or not we could deliver this project better through the borough, and that required liaison with our neighbouring authorities to the west, Buckinghamshire and Chilterns, etc. But importantly, liaising with TfL, and in our petition, both our petitions, we obviously referenced West Ruislip Depot as a potential source of a solution to get rid of most, if not all, of the significant effects associated with this development. So we engaged with TfL fairly early on in the process, and we're starting to get the culmination of that work now.
And as far as TfL was concerned, from the early in the process, was TfL alive to the point you've just made, namely the desire to use West Ruislip in order to get rid of consequences of the HS2?
That's correct. It wasn't the council's proposal originally. We obviously don't know what TfL had planned for their depots. It was their suggestion to us that the depot could be used. So it was a starting point for further discussions.
I want now, if we may, to look at something which concerns TfL and concerns matters which were spoken to yesterday. And if we could put up, please, first, P6223.
You'll be pleased to know we'll come on to noise in a bit.
No doubt it will be averaged out. If we could look at 6223, please, as the start of just a little sequence of questions here, please. We saw this yesterday, and can you just help the committee with your understanding of what this is showing, and in particular the peak which is there revealed?
Yes, so this is the phasing of the traffic associated with the phasing of the hybrid bill scheme. And what we can see there obviously is a rather substantial Everest-type peak there early on in the project. So the first thing, over 1,000 vehicles per day. And one of the points I think that was lost yesterday was that there's a focus on this particular peak to the detriment of the rest of it. But the traffic associated with HS2 after this peak is still substantial. And I think some of the focus has been lost on that peak, and we shouldn't lose sight of what happens in the 6-7 years after that as well.
Can we then go, please, to 6210, with which this plan can be associated, P6210, the peak being phase 2. And this is within a sequence of plans referable to the HS2 proposal.
That's correct.
Signifying that which is proposed to be done and when it is proposed to be done.
Correct.
And the items here that can be seen, one can see what they are simply by glancing at the plan without reading them out. But there are those matters which emerge if one was tunnelling.
Not at all, no.
And is there any further comment that's necessary here to be made as far as this plan is concerned?
So one of the, I think the committee was left with a representation yesterday that setting up West Ruislip Depot would be equivalent to that initial peak that we saw just a few moments ago on the histogram. The truth is that that's not the case. Setting up a depot is more akin to just an urban type development. And certainly this scheme in front of us, and certainly this map, demonstrates the uniqueness of HS2. So in that peak period of traffic, the plus 1,000 vehicles a day, there's an embankment to put in, there's a cutting, there's a retaining wall, there's 3 underpasses and material to be brought in for that. There's muck to be cut out at a cutting. All that's associated with those 1,000 plus vehicles. None of that is required with the depot. So to suggest that it's about the same is plainly wrong. The fact of the matter is that setting up the depot will have considerably less traffic than those 1,000 plus vehicles a day. And that point shouldn't be lost, because that gets rid of one of your major problems with this scheme in the first instance. We are still working with TfL, and the letter that was submitted yesterday by Mr Johnson is supported by a report that looks at these facts. And I know that TfL will be on the stand in beginning of July, I think it is, and you're more than welcome to interrogate them on that matter. But they will support the case that this will have a considerable less amount of traffic.
You're extending an existing depot that's going to have electricity and water and sewage and all those sort of things there already.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and the second point on that is related to the access that we saw when we went out on site. And I know that you, like I did at the time, would have some concerns about using that access to construct a depot. Although once it's up and running, we have to appreciate that there's much greater benefits. We'll come on to in a second. But just in terms of that access, TfL have acknowledged that they can turn that from single lane into 2 lanes. So that gets rid of your other impediment to being able to use that depot properly.
Well, can we then take this sequence a little further, please? If we go to 6222, P6222, where we can see diagrammatically shown the depot associated with Harville Road and the West Ruislip
That's correct.
facility. And first of all, please, as far as the exercise on West Ruislip is concerned, you've mentioned the involvement of Transport for London. In their consideration of the matter, joint consideration of the matter, have they been alive to the fact that your desire is to build a tunnel?
That's correct, yes.
And have they been conscious of whether or no Harville Road is required alongside the West Ruislip depot?
So the task that we wanted to get through with TfL was to get rid of all the problems around Ickenham, or as much as we could. The depot was a good solution. As I said, TfL came up with it. And importantly, TfL gets something out of this. So it's not just two parties ganging up on HS2 because we don't like them. It's TfL have a vested interest in this. I'm not saying we dislike HS2, just HS2 Limited, sorry, we obviously dislike HS2. So there's a vested interest in this for TfL, and as a consequence, they put a lot of time and effort into trying to make this work. Now, the image that you see in front of you on the screen, that shows the depot and a series of other bits and pieces. Now, in our mind, there would be no point us extending the depot and creating problems elsewhere while still having all the problems in Ickenham as well. That's just plainly bonkers. So what the task for TfL was to try and absorb everything into that depot where we possibly can. And they've done that. So those bits and pieces that you see to the west of the screen around Ickenham on this map, they don't exist with the TfL depot scheme. You know, these guys did Crossrail, they know the logistics, they know how it operates. And as I understand it from yesterday, this would only be required for the fit-out. So everything else can be done from the depot, except the fit-out, according to HS2 and this map. The point is actually TfL believes that the fit-out can be done from the depot. So if you can do the fit-out from the depot, you get rid of all that stuff to the west around Ickenham, and that's the goal that we should be looking to achieve.
So if we look at 6222 and we look at where the words Harville Road appear on the plan, and we look immediately to the area above that, is any of that required for the tunnel?
No.
And we also can notice, can't we, there's a vent shaft, two vent shafts shown here. Are we suggesting that both those vent shafts are required for the tunnel?
Well, you remember from Mr. Blaine yesterday that only one vent shaft was required from his expert evidence. There's two shown on here. We think one of those is unnecessary. So the only resulting feature that would be common to both would be the electricity supplies. For obvious reasons, we have concerns about why they have to be there in that particular location. But nonetheless, that would be the only remaining feature that would be comparable with both schemes.
Leaving aside the issue of tunnelling or a surface railway, the fact that there is already an existing depot in the area, even if you couldn't totally take out the need for something like Harville Road, even if you could reduce the scale, the footprint and the length of time, it would have quite a big effect on Ickenham, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would, sir. The fit-out is a major point, though, because HS2 still requires a railhead for that fit-out to be carried out. And as soon as you have a railhead in Ickenham, then you still have all the ancillary works associated with it. So it's removing that railhead that's the important factor. And I understand the point that was made yesterday. Is it easier to do a fit-out from surface through a purpose-built railhead? I suspect, without being an expert on it, invariably, yes, it is easier to do that than through the depot. But so at which point do we consider the difficulty of this scheme? Do we consider it once all the factors have been put in place and you're left with a choice between fitting out a tunnel from the depot or fitting it out from a railhead, which is easier, probably the railhead option. But we can't look at the difficulty at that stage. The difficulty has to be looked at now. Getting that railhead into Ickenham is hugely difficult. That fact cannot be lost. It is enormously difficult. You lose HOAC for the surface scheme. You lose HOAC, you have carnage on the roads, landscape impacts, and we'll come on to all these in a bit more detail. There's a whole range of difficult factors to make it easy for them to be able to fit out a rail through the surface route. Yes, it might be slightly more difficult to do it from fitting out from the West Ruislip depot, but it's easier to set it up, far, far easier. And that's, I would say, we have to give that considerable weight and at least challenge HS2 Limited to sit down with TfL and come up with this solution.
Can we just ask one more matter on this 6222, and then we'll revert to your slides. Yes. On the Ruislip depot that we see there, we know that London Underground Limited are already there.
That's correct.
As far as the depot is concerned, Chiltern Railway is nearby.
Yes, correct.
Does that use the facility there at all?
Yes.
Help the committee, please, as to whether flexibility is enhanced if you've got a number of operators there, or diminished.
Well, I would say it's enhanced, sir. We've got. I know HS2 Limited have a problem with the difficulty of interfacing with a number of other partners, and they've said it would be easier. Again, it would be easier if they could just do their own bit from their own site in Ickenham. But there is flexibility in this site as well. TfL have confirmed that there would be use of not just the Chiltern line that you'd be able to access as you would from Ickenham, but there's also use of the London Underground lines as well, where necessary. So we've worked with them hard on that, and they came up with that proposal themselves. So there's flexibility in what can be delivered on this site, which you don't get with the Ickenham Railhead solution.
Well, let's go back, Mr. Thine, to your slides then. Leave that there unless there was anything other particular you wanted to mention at this stage. And we left your slides at 10685, and we go, please, to 10686. And we see there, diagrammatically represented, where things are going to happen, if I may crudely put it that way.
That's correct.
And 3, the number 3, and there are 3 of them, represent spoil dumping sites. Is that otherwise known as the sustainable placement?
Yes.
Then I think we can go on, unless there's anything you want to draw out particularly from that, Mr. Thine. We can go on to 10687.
It's just simply to say that I'll be talking around those particular features in a little bit more detail. So feature 1, slide 7, is the viaduct construction.
And so we see that shown, and that's just the plan which shows where it is and what's proposed.
I mean, it's fair enough that I can't have too many problems with these plans as such, but they sort of give a distorted figure of what constructing the viaduct, and particularly in this instance, would look like. And the site, they call it the site. Sorry, that pink area is the potentially required for construction. That nice light pink, and it sort of detracts from the potential of what we could see. So we can go on to the next slide.
Yes, we go on to number 8, and this shows. It's a photograph of what?
So this is it's up. So this is the construction of the HS1 Medway viaduct. It's not in there to alarm or to present a sensationalised image of what construction we'd expect in the Colne Valley. It's just to simply give a visual understanding of what's going to happen in those light pink areas in the HS2 maps. And this is, this is a recent example of constructing a viaduct. I'm not going to suggest it's going to look exactly the same as this, but you can get an impression of what it would look like in the Colne Valley.
Well, the photograph I saw of the Swight's roundabout being built on the A40.
When was that shown?
The man behind you can tell you, about 30 years ago.
Yes, it was.
We see there, of course, working from the water.
That's correct.
Is there anything to suggest that HS2 won't work from the water here?
Again, the amount of piers that are being suggested, again, not being overly knowledgeable in the field of building viaducts, but it would suggest that you would probably have some sort of causeway system like you have here, obviously have cranes and the like, and you would take up a lot of the water through the construction period.
Then if we can just go on, please, because I think number 9, 10689, is this a same or similar scene at night?
Yes, same viaduct being constructed. This is just an image of night, so again showing, I can't imagine everything closes down and everyone packs up and the Colne Valley is left serene overnight. You would have this throughout the construction period of the viaduct. The Medway Viaduct is very, very short in comparison to what we'd expect across the Colne Valley. Certainly considerably less piers, and I think it just gives a fair reflection of the likely construction impact we'd have in the Colne Valley, which I think is important to get a visual context for.
Thank you. And then 106810, please.
Thank you.
Sorry, carry on.
Sorry, I was just in terms of this slide, sir. Where that viaduct is going is shown on the red line, straight across the Colne Valley. You can see the surface section emerging at Ickenham High Road. But the interesting thing about this one is you can see the extent of the grey urban areas to the east, Ruislip, Ickenham, towards Harrow, Wembley, and it emerges in the service route in the area of Greenbelt, as I've already said. So you can see that there was an idea being formed as to where the tunnel should emerge, as if to suggest that because it's not near many houses that there aren't that many impacts. Plainly that's not the case. So.
Then number 10691.
So in terms of the Colne Valley, you've obviously heard from the CIC earlier, or later last week I think it was. And it's just to reiterate the point that the Colne Valley isn't a London Borough of Hillingdon benefit or use. This slide shows that it's actually a regional park. So this is designated by the GLA, the Mayor of London. There are six regional parks and 3 opportunities. So 6 regional parks across London, of which the Colne Valley is one. It's also recognised that there's a deficiency in West London. So all of a sudden you can get an understanding that the Colne Valley, the importance of the Colne Valley is a lot higher than perhaps others. And this is exactly where HS2 will go through.
Well, let's go on then to 10692, and here we have a drawing taken from HS2 drawings.
That's correct, yes.
And this is showing what happens at and in the vicinity of Harville Road.
Correct.
And you refer to the Ickenham railhead here as indicating a temporary railhead being required. And I want you just in a moment or two, please, just describing to the committee what is being shown on this plan and what you are drawing out from it.
Right, so the area broadly hashed in red is approximately about 7.5 hectares of land. And this is the land that has to be levelled to create access to the Chiltern line. So,
and the Chiltern line one can see is the double continuous line towards the foot of the slide just there.
That's correct. And you can see the railhead bits and pieces in between the HS2 line and the double line of the Chiltern.
line
And
is at the edge of Ruislip as well.
Yes.
And there's a gap between it and HS2 as proposed, and in order to achieve a flat surface between the two, one has to do excavation work.
That's correct, yes. Sorry, just on the Chiltern line, that's the same Chiltern line that you're right that goes past the depot. Recently we spoke with TfL and there's been some concerns about whether or not trains could go along the Chiltern line. So HS2 putting muck onto, using this railhead, muck onto a train that uses the Chiltern line and goes west towards Calvert. There's some concern, as I understand it from TfL, that the trains can't actually go west from this particular point because of timetabling, and Network Rail have some concerns about that. So they would have to come back past the depot and find another way up on the Chiltern line. There's two branches on the Chiltern line, one up towards Aylesbury and one up towards Birmingham. Again, worth questioning, I would have thought. TfL perhaps when they come on the stand later.
And we see in your box top right how the material is to be transported over a 1.8 kilometre conveyor system.
That's correct.
And that you've got HS2 require about 7.5 hectares of land to be flattened.
That's right. So looking down on it, it's 7.5 hectares of land.
And then your next slide, please, 10693. You're here talking about that area of land we've just been talking about.
That's correct.
And got a section which reveals diagrammatically, does it, what has to be dug.
That's correct, yeah.
And so one can see at the top the area which is all taken out, and underneath you've shown the line of the railway together with the Angel of the North.
That's correct. Fantastic bit of sculpture from up north, I understand. I didn't deliberately pick that for your benefit, so I have to say.
Stipulated boundaries there that you know.
It's absolutely nothing to do with it. I did Google what is 20 metres tall, and it just so happens to be the Angel of the North. Pure coincidence.
Absolutely.
But it does illustrate the extent of earthworks that are required to be dug out just to make way for this railhead, which, I have to remind you, then gets dismantled 7-8 years later.
Very well. Well, then if we go on, please, we can see where at least some of the material has to go to.
That's correct.
Because one's digging out a lot, 10694.
So I'm aware that, having received the slides from last week from HS2, this has changed slightly. So as I understand it, that the dumping site, sustainable placement site to the north, the one to the top of the screen. Thank you. The dumping site to the north of the screen, that's New Year's Green Lane. So that, as I understand it, is now gone. The one below that, I think, has been altered to get around the West London composting facility problem. But nonetheless, you still get a sense that taking out 7.5 hectares worth of land to the depth that they are requires dumping on a lot of other land around the area. It's striking, if I might, can we just turn up P6199, if that's possible?
Certainly, P6199.
Hoping I've got my reference correct. Yes, I believe I have. So you can see this is additional provision proposal. So this is the change scheme that came out last week. So you can see another area of temporary topsoil storage just to the west of Harville Road. So where that yellow triangular is to the... That's correct. There's another area there, and then there's some further topsoil storage elsewhere. So that's an additional bit of land to the other side of Harville Road that hasn't been factored into our assessments to date. And obviously there is a concern with that because you've got to get across Harville Road to dump the topsoil and then get back across when you're relaying the topsoil on the dump land.
Presumably you've got to take the topsoil out, store it,
yes,
and then you've got to take it back after how many years. So you've got double the number of vehicles?
Yes. Preempting HS2's response to that, if I may be so bold, that there's a reliance on haul roads, so not local roads. Although subject to how you get across Harville Road, I'm not entirely sure yet. But for the others, and you can see on, if you go back to my slide, A10694.
Yes.
You can see the light blue squiggles on there. They're the haul roads. So that's how the dumping sites will be accessed. So in effect, creating new roads through the countryside. And for obvious reasons, we also have concerns with that. We have road networks for a reason, so that people don't end up driving through fields. HS2 are actively putting in haul roads to avoid the local roads. On one hand, that's a good thing, but on the other hand, that's through the countryside, turning the dumping sites or extending the dumping sites along those haul roads in terms of the impacts. A point that again shouldn't be lost.
And just before we leave 10694, we can notice the total of approximately 75 hectares. We can translate that into football pitches if we like.
Indeed. 105 football pitches.
And then the height, up to 3 metres high, that will be, a double-decker bus is 14'6".
I have no idea what 14'6" is.
Sorry. Anyway, higher than the double-decker bus. So approximately a story, as you say.
Yes. Yes. Obviously subject to the changes in the additional provisions, which we haven't seen the detail of yet.
Thank you. Well, then let's go to 10695.
And again, just an image of what earthworks look like. I'm sure we can all get some kind of understanding from our own thought processes, but it's nice to put a visual context to it again. That's going to be on a fair amount of sites across the borough for a fair amount of time.
And then we come, to 10696, the conveyor system, which, if we remind ourselves, by flicking back to 10686, this is feature 4 rather, isn't it?
It's feature 3.
Feature 3, because it shows how one's getting to the dumping sites.
That's right, yes.
And so 10696.
So from the
10696, please.
So from the Ickenham tunnel portal, or West Ruislip tunnel portal, should I say, they need to move the muck as it comes out of the tunnel, and that's going to be put on a conveyor system out towards the railhead. That's about 1.8 kilometres long, although there's precious little details of it. And that'll be a 24/7 operation. And some of the facts gleaned from some of our residents through emails, because it wasn't contained in the environmental statement, has come to light over the last year or so. So if I can just go through these just very quickly.
Presumably the additional tunnel which the government put in means more muck has to come out. So the benefit of a tunnel does have the disbenefit of having a lot of muck.
Indeed, but the solution for that and it would require a conveyor system. So instead of this conveyor system that goes all the way out to the temporary railhead, under the tunnel proposal, there would be a conveyor system that runs from the portal or from the shaft within West Ruislip Depot, details to be drawn up and confirmed, and that material will be dumped straight onto the West Ruislip Depot site, obviously in a allocated place, and then taken away by rail from there. So your conveyor system will either be a lot shorter or not necessary in its entirety, just a shorter version through the depot. This one, 1.8 kilometres, running along the back of people's houses, along the golf course, across Breakspear Road South, and then out towards the railhead site.
Just in case anyone's watching who's doing maths exams this year, 3 metres is less than 10 feet. It gets nowhere near 14.
Oh, I beg your pardon, sir. It shows when I took the O-level.
not just this barrier. We can't do that.
What was that? 4.5, isn't it? 4.5 metres above 4. You know. Well, what Mr. Vine was saying is it's 3 metres, which is a story, which is wrong as well.
It's about a story, surely. No? Oh, not this story. Not all buildings are as grand as this one.
I suspect it depends which scheme one is building towards or building in. In any event, it's a high amount of material to place upon another existing piece of material. And if we then just go back to 10696, had you concluded on 10696?
It was just to reiterate that that not only will there be a conveyor system as well, there'll be a light gauge railway. So the conveyor system brings muck out 24/7, and then coming back the other way for the fit out, as I understand it, will be a light gauge railway. And if we can turn to over the slide, if possible.
10697.
And you can see the image from the ES at the bottom there, absent of both the conveyor system and the light gauge railway. You can just about make out the conveyor route in the environmental statement map just above it, but actually the line, the details, none of that was actually included in the environmental statement.
So the conveyor route in the plan is shown there, is it?
That's correct.
Yes.
So an absence of information for the residents to get their heads around, particularly those living on the greenways, the residential road to the south, who will be faced with a conveyor system which will be 1.2 metres wide, high as necessary to cover ground obstacles, no further information than that, and one serving each of the tunnels. So 2 conveyor systems running side by side.
Very well. Well, let's go on to 10698, please, which is your feature 5. And this is then the construction compound.
That's correct.
The Harville Road construction compound.
That's correct.
The one not necessary if there's a tunnel.
That's correct.
10698 then, please.
So this, again, it's difficult to put a visual context on what exactly will be within that area, but this is an example of a concrete factory and segment storage yard used for Crossrail. So something akin to that size in the fields. If we can go over the slide, if that's possible.
10699, please.
So it'll be going in this field here, which, if you remember from your site visit, we walked through Mr. Gustafson's property at Brackenbury House and went into the fields around the back and looked around what I was pleasantly surprised by, a fantastic landscape. Don't think that's sensationalising it at all. I think that's a fair statement to make. And that's where the compound would go.
Thank you.
And sorry to strike it. That goes after 10 years. So comes in, gets built, all the harm, and then it gets dismantled and taken away again.
106.910, please. This is your 6th feature, feature 6, electricity supply.
That's correct. You'll remember many moons ago when you heard from the Harefield lot before the general election, there were some concerns about the electricity supplies. And one of the ongoing features of our concerns is the disproportionate impacts. So not only do the people of Harefield get a viaduct, for some reason they get 2 forms of electricity supply as well on their doorstep. There's been no justification provided as to why these have to go here or why they can't be sited elsewhere, or at least one, not the other, why we need 2. And the other interesting feature on this map, sir, is the triangular parcel of land to the south of the site, which is pretty much the only industrial activity in this area. that's of all things, I think, concrete and aggregates facility. That's been safeguarded by HS2, but interestingly, they've ignored it and opted to go for greenfield lands to put some of the infrastructure on. So again, not exactly why I would say going to might be an easier decision to have done that, but again, a slightly more difficult option might have resulted in a better project.
Thank you. Well, then we look, please, at 10701, where we move from those particular features to some general issues.
Yes, yes.
And so just help us, please, with this plan.
So it's
10701, coming up now.
It's just to illustrate the point, sir, that the focus is on the construction compounds, the dumping sites, and where they've been shown in the HS2 environmental statement. Some of the more pertinent features have been shaded in colour, and the rest of it has just been left in this nice little salmon pink, if I may go with that. And it's just to illustrate that within those pink areas themselves, there's quite a lot of work, quite a lot of engineering work. So it's not just isolated to the main construction features. So, for example, you've got your haul roads that I've spoken about. There's creation of islands in the lakes, so that's going to require some movement of material and dumping of material. There's a lot of ponds that requires excavation, wetland creation, again, more excavation work, flood storage, some kind of cut and fill on the setting up of the compound. So there's a lot of general activity going on within this entire area. So no one is spared, if I may use that phrase.
Thank you. Well, that was 0701. 10702, please. Here we're looking at construction impacts from the tunnelled section. That's the tunnelled section as proposed by HS2, is it?
That's correct, yes. So this is just to illustrate that even in the tunnel section, there will be some impacts. But two things from this. Firstly, you can see that there's a lot less. But secondly, here, the impacts from this is largely utilities works. The impacts from the utility works are heightened by the fact of the construction traffic problems associated with the surface route to the west. So one of the things that Mr. Knowles was talking about yesterday was displaced traffic. So a lot of the roads around Ickenham will be clogged, so a lot of people will be taking diversions, and it's possible that they'll be taking diversions onto roads that have utilities works on them. Now, if these utility works were to come forward first, then a lot of the people on these roads will be using the roads in Ickenham, at which point utilities works end, and all the people from Ickenham will start using these roads. So you end up with, whichever way you look at it, you're increasing the amount of traffic activity in one way or the other because of the tunnelling works. So it's just to illustrate that even in the tunnel section, impacts are compounded by what's going on in the surface section as well.
Thank you. And then we go on, please, 10703. We see a vent shaft, I think.
Yes.
And we can probably pass quickly over that to 10704, please, where you touch upon traffic matters.
That's correct. Again, this is a little bit out of date now, given the updated material from HS2 and also the assurance that we have yesterday. But I wasn't going to cover this in any detail because it's obviously Mr. Knowles' field. All I was going to raise here was that the project that's been presented to us in the environmental statement still needs considerable amount of work. We obviously have that as part of the assurance yesterday. So an acceptance that further work is required and they actually need to go and assess whether or not the traffic in this area can be, or their traffic impacts can actually be accommodated. Again, agree with Mr. Knowles that I would like to have thought that that point had been clarified by now already. But the second point on this is there seems to be an absence of information relating to commuter traffic associated with HS2, so how the workers actually get into and out of the site. So I haven't seen any in the latest information. I'll happily stand corrected, but but at its peak there'll be 600 plus workers. They've all got to get in here somehow. So the construction traffic associated with HS2 is HGVs, vans and cars associated with the construction works, and also getting people to and from the site. And you'll remember from Mr. Knowles that public transport is not exactly the greatest in this area, so that they will have, I suspect a lot of them will have to come by car.
Go up.
Well, that could be one solution, sir, the white van with lots of construction workers in the back. That's not for me to plan HS2's traffic plan.
Then we can go over, please, to 10705, where you've got some images, I think, of HS1 being built, 10705.
That's correct. Again, sir, it's just to put a visual context to those pink areas. I'm sure you'll see these slides, or have done, or variations of them. And it's just to, again, not to sensationalise, but just to give a clear understanding of what the borough is going to see. And remember that the very first slide was about the thousands of people. This will impact on considerable amounts of lives, and it's worth putting this into a visual context to understand exactly what this construction impact means.
And then 10711, please, where you have a question posed top right as to what would the tunnel do.
Yes.
And the tunnel you are there talking about is which tunnel?
That's the Colne Valley Tunnel Extension proposal.
As proposed by
Hillingdon's
London Borough of
proposal.
Hillingdon. And those which you've identified in that darkish green, I think a wrong document has come up. 10711, please.
You asked for 1.
Oh, I beg your pardon, sir.
That's the one.
10711. Thank you.
So in a nutshell, sir, the tunnel removes a lot of those construction issues. And remember, this is at the minute I'm just talking about construction and the impact on that. I'll come on to the effects and the consequences of the scheme in a bit more time, but that's just to give you a flavour of what HS2 is in the London Borough of Hillingdon, the sheer size of the project. Excellent. Thank you, sir.
Okay. And then we go to 1071 brackets 2, please. You just make a point here about the Heathrow Spur, about which there was some discussion yesterday.
Yes, and it was just to flag up the exchange just before the general election, and it was talking about removing the potential blight, and this was largely related to the passive provision. So as far as we're concerned, sir, that it's no longer on the table, the passive provision.
Certainly not flying.
Just left there.
Very well, let's proceed, please, to look at Hillingdon with HS2 in operation, if we may. And for this purpose, we go to first 10714.
Again, these plans have been somewhat superseded now, but it's just to give you a flavour of what HS2 would look like in operation, although it is worth saying at this particular point it would be 15 years from when planting trees and grass and whatever would take to establish.
10715, you've marked on a plan the noise in the Colne Valley, I think.
Yes, again, just to a point I think raised by the CIC last week was that the landscape in the Colne Valley will be altered by the viaduct, but also the noise landscape as well.
Yeah. And you've done the same, I think, for 10716, the operational noise tunnel portal.
That's correct. Again, the adverse noise effects affecting close to about 200 properties.
And I think we should just note here, should we, Mr. Thine, that the London Borough of Hillingdon stands behind the generic case which is presented on noise.
That's correct.
10717.
I just wanted to, just briefly, if I may, just talk about the development of the project and why we think that the tunnel scheme, makes even more sense because there's still a lot of question marks about the proposal that's in front of us.
And 10718.
Again, before I get into the nitty-gritty of those bits, the council in its petition, amongst others, have talked about the deficiencies of the ES. I do have a couple of complaints with the process. The first is the environmental statement has now morphed into beyond its 55,000 pages, and if you look at the technical papers and the work papers and the rest of it, it's quite an unwieldy document now to be able to get your head round. The Barclay case, the famous Barclay case in the House of Lords, that said environmental statements should all be in one neat little package. I think that's plainly not the case anymore. So it's a complaint that the council has made on the ES. And then the second point is that it hasn't actually fully assessed all the significant effects. And in particular, if we can go to 10719.
Together, you want a smaller environmental statement, but there needs more facts in it. Everybody that comes before us says they want more and more and more. So,
no, I agree, sir. But in terms of environmental statement, it should all be packaged up in the same document. I have no problems with it being 55,000 pages. I have no problems with it getting bigger, but it all has to be in the assessment so that it can be looked at as a whole. So elements shouldn't be left out where it seems tricky to include them.
And then we get to 10719. This is an instance, is it, that you're deriving from what you were just talking about?
That's correct. So the environmental statement hasn't assessed all the significant effects. This is an example. There's a suggestion that the proposed scheme may result in cutting off of water supplies in the Colne Valley, and one of the solutions is importing water from another area. Again, in terms of significant effects, the environmental statement should really have an answer to this. It shouldn't be left further down the line.
Thank you. Then 10710, please.
This is just a bit of background as to how the railhead came about. So in June 2013, the railhead was there. Can we go to the next slide?
Yes, 10711.
But importantly, the 3 dumping sites weren't included. So in June 2013, we got a draft environmental statement that showed a railhead, and at this point, no one realised that they needed to dump loads of soil in the area. And these are the safeguarding directions that safeguarded the draft ES scheme.
Put them rather they didn't know they were going to get it.
Perhaps, but we were commenting on a draft ES as the local authority, and we would have thought that all the information that we would need to comment on at that stage would have been pretty much there or thereabouts. It came as somewhat of a surprise when just a few months later we end up with 3 large dumping sites.
10712, please.
We can skip past this one fairly quickly, but it's just to reiterate that one of those sites that they selected went on West London composting. A simple Google Earth search when they...
Keep moving a bit.
Sorry.
Some things are redundant to say.
Right.
10713.
Again, just going back to the public rights of way that were discussed yesterday. Some of these diversions are not appropriate. So the proposal in front of us, the mitigation included, doesn't actually act as mitigation. I'll go to the next one if I may.
14.
Again, you can see the diversion all the way down Breakspear Road South, all the way back up Harville Road to get back to that route going through the Colne Valley. We had an assurance recently, I think in the last week or so, that that Breakspear Road South, which you've been told is very dangerous because you can't get 2 lorries side by side pretty much, they would create a footpath along Breakspear Road South, that was in the assurance, to accommodate pedestrian traffic. The problem with that, sir, is that to the side of Breakspear Road South, on each side, are drainage ditches which regularly fill, hence the flooding that we saw on Breakspear Road South on the site visit. So again, that assurance relating to the footpaths has got a lot of work to do, not least in the sheer extent of it, but whether or not it's actually practical from a drainage perspective and a safety perspective as well.
So that's not a very big road then? I think we went along there in a coach and pulled up
That's
to meet
correct,
some people
yes.
who were standing on the side of the road.
Yes. That's further down, but further up towards the northern part where the bridge is, which also is a bit of an issue because the road goes under a low bridge and traffic goes into the middle. So you'd have to find a footpath that goes alongside that while still being
There's some
safe.
flooding along there as well.
And that's where there's extensive flooding as well. So again, the assurance related to that, not sure it would be delivering what it needs to do to accommodate pedestrian traffic.
That was 107114. 107115, please.
Just to reiterate the points about ecology, again, just shown on plans, but if we can go to the next slide, quickly after that.
10721.
So, grassland being planted on some parts of grassland, woodland being planted within existing woodland. Is this really ecological mitigation? Is this the best we can come up with? And I think we heard from the CIC on that respect. I think we can achieve a little bit more.
And then 10722. Here you're looking at the consequences of the hybrid build scheme.
That's correct.
Landscape ecology, noise, air quality, recreational impacts. 10723.
You've already heard about the landscape impacts in the Colne Valley, so I won't reiterate that. I will just make the point that in our landscape character assessment that HS2 Limited didn't reference, there's clear acceptance of the tranquility and the landscape in the Colne Valley.
And then 10724, you quote from the environmental statement, the large-scale viaduct and associated train still prominent. This is up to year 60.
Yep.
And so forth. Magnitude of change is considered within the ES to be medium.
Yes, it's the bit in there that says however, replaced vegetation will have re-established and reformed the connectivity of the lakeside vegetation. Therefore, the magnitude of change is considered to be medium. So they don't consider a viaduct through the Colne Valley as being a significant long-term visual effect. Well, I'll leave it to you, sir, whether you deem that to be a sensible conclusion or not.
Well, just to be clear, that's because we need to take time on this later. Medium and magnitude of change is equivalent to a significant effect.
10725, please. We see a picture which we've seen before, and I suspect we can pass straight through it.
Yes. The slide after this.
10726. Underneath that pink area is what we previously looked at, is it?
That's correct. This overlay should have been, you should be able to see through it in fact, but you get the point, sir, that's basically the noise profile of HS2 Limited. Or HS2, sorry, not HS2 Limited, my apologies. That's the noise profile of the train. So between 55, 65 dB plus, that's akin to the noise levels we get from Heathrow Airport. I know they'll probably take it.
Underneath the area coloured as water, not people.
It's the fishing lakes that we talked about yesterday, the Grand Union Canal, the Hoac Lake, the marina, that's in there, and a few other bits and pieces, but yeah, the recreational lakes.
How many people live within that band, do you know?
Within that, in terms of I think there's a few, but I think that goes outside the area, so Sabe Farm, for example.
Yeah, on the other side, in the
Yes,
Buckinghamshire
might
side.
be on the other side.
Okay.
And it's just edged by the De Vere Hotel, or is that just within it?
I think it's wrongly placed.
The De Vere Hotel, I'm being told, should be placed slightly further to the left. Within or without the pink?
I don't know.
Very well. And then 10727.
This is just to reiterate the point that the council has, sir, that landscape needs to be given considerable weight in decision making, and also obviously in the development of this proposal. Just because it doesn't affect residents, it doesn't mean that our landscape is fair game to completely change for the worse. And this was the letter to the planning inspector just to reaffirm that landscape should be given considerable weight in decision making.
10729, you're referring to construction noise in the Colne Valley.
again, reiterate points that were made early on when Harefield residents were up. There are no construction noise contours for the Colne Valley. Creating that viaduct that we saw images of earlier leads to noise levels between 71 and 81 dB. You'll get into the nitty-gritty of noise later, but that's fairly damaging levels of noise in terms of the recreational quality of that of the Colne Valley.
And then 107.210.
Again, construction noise near the tunnel portal. You can see the figures there quite clearly during the day. They are quite high levels. Interestingly, on this one, the nighttime levels are fairly low or as existing, which begs the question: has the conveyor belt and the light gauge railway been taken into account? I'm not sure it has, but it would be nice to have that confirmed by HS2.
And then 107.31, operational noise in the Colne Valley.
So this leads to the big pink blob that we saw earlier. So you can start seeing that certainly around Hoac, which is the bottom right, the star in the bottom right-hand corner, daytime noise levels of about 66 decibels. That's approaching the relocation package that Heathrow Airport offers up. And maximum noise levels of 78, 81 decibels. Maximum noise levels associated with trains coming over the viaduct, 18 per hour, 36 per hour, one every 1.5 minutes or so.
And then 107.32.
And just taking the same operational noise profiles for the residential areas. I understand these have changed because in the environmental statement it only assessed a 3-metre high barrier, not a 5-metre high barrier. Again, HS2 may confirm that with us. So these figures, I believe, have come down somewhat. But the point again relates to the averaging and the maximums. Maximum noise levels of around 70 decibels are extremely high. The averaging throughout the course of the day, from on-peak to off-peak, those averages are basically brought down by the off-peak traffic. So if you don't run a consistent service during the day, then your averaging across the day in terms of noise levels will come down. And the point about the maximum noise level is that's what will happen early in the morning with trains, so possibly waking you up, or last thing at night. And it's those maximums that we have to give a lot of weight to as well. You'll hear more about that from the noise people in due course, I'm sure.
Then if we could go, please...
Sorry. Just a little note for myself. Can I just go to P62692, please? Again, hoping my reference is okay. So you'll see on the bottom image there, photo montage, operation year 1. I don't know where the 5-metre high noise barrier will be going. I think 5 metres high, not sure what that is in feet. But I think it's fair to say that that's... There you go.
It's more than a double-decker.
Yes, I think, and that would be a sheer wall, sheer barrier to the back of the greenways, in effect. I would have expected that to be assessed and understood to know what that would actually look like for the residents in those gardens.
Thank you. Well, then if we go, please, to 10734, where you simply identify for us, 10734, the attribution given to certain conservation sites.
That's correct. Yep.
SSSIs and sites of importance for nature conservation and their grading. And on 10735, we see diagrammatically represented, do we, where they are, and you've included within that a hatching for the green belt.
That's correct. It's just to reiterate the point that this is not low quality environment that this is going through. This is green belt should be protected, and also in close to and over and through sites of importance for nature conservation. So long-term ecological impacts, notwithstanding the fact that over time something will be put back, but whether or not it's materially better is debatable, and I always challenge the assertion that HS2 Limited, all they're entitled to do is just put back. I think that's shouldn't be the aim of a project of this size. I'm sure you've heard about that already.
10736, I think you've there put into words the references to the effect, or at least part of the effect, of HS2 on the various places that you've identified.
That's correct. It's just to highlight the point that it will have significant ecological impacts.
And so just taking one at random, 10 hectares of woodland, 33% of the total woodland area of the SSSI,
Yep.
and then 0.75 hectares of swamp vegetation and loss of breeding bird habitat and so forth. And then we come to 10737, where you've moved to, and we can pass straight to 10738, contaminated land, I think.
We can skip past this slide as well, because this is the dumping site that has now been moved.
And so that gets us to surface water management, 107.310, please.
So this is the area in between Harville Road and Breakspear Road. This is one of the reasons why there's flooding under Breakspear Road South. And this is where they're going to dump loads of material without having consulted the local flood authority for our consent. We have a vested interest in understanding the drainage from that dumping site, and we've yet to come to any conclusion. So this is another thing that has to be put off until later in the project.
10741, you look at agricultural land and its loss.
That's correct.
And you
yes. A net,
you give us the numbers.
Yeah, a permanent loss of 145 hectares, in effect 200 hectares, temporary loss, 145 permanent.
And then you come to the question of air quality, and we see at 10743, Swateley's roundabout again.
You saw the slide yesterday, sir. We all know about the air quality problems. It's been in the press recently with the Supreme Court judgment. Air quality isn't one of those issues that we can just put to one side and say, oh, we can deal with it through lower emission vehicles. It surely has to go to the heart of understanding and developing a project in the first instance. And if you did take this air quality problem into account, would we have cited construction compound, and would we have highlighted this area for 1,000 plus vehicles a day? Again, this supports the argument about the West Ruislip depot and a significant reduction in traffic.
Then 10745, please, you move to recreational impacts.
It's just to illustrate that across the line of the route we'll lose a lot of recreational facilities, rights of way diversions. The Rifle Club will be lost. West Ruislip Golf Course, likely closure. Playing fields restricted through utilities. So a wide range of effects throughout.
And then 10746.
Again, moving to the west, more rights of way diverted or lost. Hillingdon Rowing Club, lost. Outdoor Activity Centre, lost. Uxbridge Golf Course, closure of holes. Grand Union Canal and other countryside uses restricted or constrained. Denham Aerodrome, they've got concerns. Denham Water Ski Club, they've got concerns. So a whole series of concerns throughout.
And then 10747, please.
Just going back to the HOAC point, if I may, sir, just go to this just for a couple of minutes. We heard yesterday from Mr. Mole talking about how we're making progress, or how the HS2 Limited are making progress, and he said that we've been working on this for 1.5, 2 years. Firstly, I dispute that time frame. You can see from the environmental state, I won't take you back to that aerial because you've seen it so many times before, of the viaduct across the Colne Valley, which clearly shows HOAC in operation underneath the viaduct. That was in the environmental statement, so that was at the end, or that was at the beginning of 2014 when that was, decision was, or the consultation ended on that. So that's less than 2 years ago, and it was HS2 Limited's assertion that they could coexist, less than 2 years ago. HS2 Limited have only gave the green light for HOAC to sit down with master planners to determine what exactly HOAC has and where it can go, October last year. So that's when things started getting ramped up in terms of finding a solution. So to suggest that it's 1.5, 2 years down the line, I dispute that, and I suspect HOAC themselves would dispute that. And if we can just go to the letter that was referenced yesterday, P62082.
This is the letter from, is it Councillor Tet?
That's correct.
The leader of the council for Buckinghamshire.
And if you go to page 2 of that, please. And Mr. Mould took us to the final paragraph of this letter, and this is when he used the phrase, we should be looking glass half full. Let's remind ourselves that this is a letter from Martin Tet at Buckinghamshire County Council to HS2 Limited. And if I just may read it out, sir. We were previously told by HS2 Limited staff that engagement meetings of this type could continue during the PERDA period, but that no assurances could be offered. Since PERDA ended in early May, Buckinghamshire County Council has still not been offered a meeting on this issue, and the window of opportunity for a successful relocation of HOAC is rapidly closing due to HS2 Limited's delays. That doesn't sound like glass half full to me, sir. That sounds like we're not making progress quickly enough. And indeed, it took Buckinghamshire County Council to write to HS2 Limited, who Mr. Mould yesterday said were all aboard getting a solution to this, to prompt a solution. So as things stand, HOAC is closing, and that would be an absolute travesty.
Then we go back, please, to the slide 10748. You've identified certain matters post-royal assent.
That's correct. So with the surface route, sir, there's a lot of things being put off till later. We'll agree the traffic with the council afterwards. Viaduct needs to be designed. Management and noise needs to be sorted out. Obviously, you've got the compensation. Agreement of construction plans. We still need to do ecology surveys. Still need to consider how maintenance is achieved. No HOAC solution. Still don't know the ground investigation report, so we don't know what kind of material is coming out. Still got problems with public water supplies, and still got to design those walkways along Breakspear Road South. There is a lot to do, sir, once we've got out of this committee room, and if this scheme was approved. A lot of this would go away with the tunnel.
Well, then if we go, please, to 107410, we start there, do we, with a pair of slides where you've put in a topic, you've recorded an outcome through the environmental statement, the mitigation, and what happens if one's got a tunnel.
That's correct.
And so one doesn't propose to read through this, but one can see that you start alphabetically with agriculture and you end up with water resources and waste and one other topic which I can't quite read because it's obscured by the number. Health. And so you see that in more or less all the instances one's got a removal if there's a tunnel.
That's correct. And if I just may just come back to the socio-economic stuff that we briefly talked about yesterday. And again, sir, it was slightly disappointing that for the first time we heard from HS2 Limited about potential benefits, and we talked about Old Oak Common. They had a chance to put that in the environmental statement. It wasn't included. We put our report to them, and they did a rebuttal. It wasn't included. It's I think it speaks volumes that the first time that we hear about potential benefits of HS2 was in cross-examination to one of our witnesses for the West London area. I think that just goes to show that there are no benefits to this scheme. There might be some, but if we talk about significance in terms of environmental statement, there are no significant benefits. And importantly, in the the Old Oak Common West London issue, that's true of both schemes. The difference is, if you had a tunnel scheme, you would still get those benefits that Mr. Mould was referring to, but you wouldn't also get the disruption around Ickenham and Ruislip. So in actual fact, that should be weight given to the idea of a tunnel.
There are also massive benefits in being the capital city of the United Kingdom, which mean that people want to get there and leave there, and all of us represent, don't represent London constituencies, and so there are swings and roundabouts in life, and one of the disadvantages of being in London, things swing both ways.
I totally take that point, sir, and I'm not here to suggest that the London Borough of Hillingdon takes precedence over the United Kingdom. But what I do want to say...
Not yet, anyway.
But what I do want to just say on that point, sir, is that in terms of fairness, is it fair that our taxpayers, who are partly paying for this scheme, get nothing out of it? You remember the 51M, sir, that might have been referenced throughout. 51M, the name of that came from 51 million per constituency. It's subsequently gone up considerably because the budget for the whole HS2 has gone up. But if you take into account that kind of fund is coming from our constituency, and how much are they getting back from that, it's difficult to look them in the eye and say, it's okay, people can get into and out of London quicker, you lot are getting no benefit, but hey, it's okay.
That's a pretty poor argument. I mean, Mr. Thane, I think that when you see the stats for public transport infrastructure investment and the comparison between the North East and London, the people in the North East pay taxes too, but to have a differential of 520 to 1, you think you're badly off?
No, I'm not saying that at all, sir. And one of the schemes that I would be more supportive of is improving the access from up to Hull towards Liverpool, for example, and but that's not on the table. Yes, well, it's to some extent it's better than this scheme, but that's not the point I'm trying to make, sir. The point I'm trying to make is that we get no benefits and a lot of harm, and wherever you come from, that's unfair.
Then we come, please, finally to 10752, where you've got conclusions, and you record in short form that which you've been talking about, which we don't travel through.
Nope.
In one or two slides which follow, you touch upon a better proposal, which is the tunnel, and you have 10754 and 5 touching upon that.
That's correct.
And just to help us on those, please, very quickly.
So the 10754.
4, yes.
So this is just going back to the start of the starting point. That's as proposed. And if we can come to the next slide.
10755.
That's what we would anticipate as part of the council's proposals. So you see that great swathe of harm removed from the middle, more impacts around West Ruislip Depot, more impacts potentially, subject to how they're managed and how that's creatively managed around West Hyde. But importantly, that large bit in the middle, gone.
And then you conclude, I think, by showing us, don't you, something of 10757 touches upon how this area has developed since the war.
Yes, so if the council was unsuccessful in getting the tunnel proposal through, then I think we just need to consider what a fallback position would look like. And I just use these series of slides just to illustrate the point. So this is the Colne Valley in 1945, largely agricultural fields, nothing like what you see today. You can see the Chiltern Line, the Grand Union Canal, just to orientate yourself. Next slide, please.
Number 8.
This is late 60s, early 70s. So this is the gravel pit extraction. So this is a lot of, for want of a better word, industrial processes going through the Colne Valley and place of those fields.
Lake creation.
Indeed, and that's come to the last slide.
10759, where one can see that and other matters.
So the point is, once the industrial's moved out, something's been put back. So you can stand on one of the hills overlooking the Colne Valley at the end of it, or the pub that we stopped on the site visit, and say something better has been achieved as a result of that gravel extraction. And that's all we're asking for, sir, if we don't get the tunnel, is for someone to be able to stand here in years' time and say, OK, we had HS2, but at least we've got something to say thank you for.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thanks,
Fine. I'm not going to ask you to put up the request slides, so I'll submit that to you. They're on a slide, and you've got them in the bundle, and I'll submit them separately in a due course. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Moore?
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Thine, while we have that slide up in front of us and with the sequence from the post-war years in our minds, it perhaps tells us two things, doesn't it, which are pervasive truths in an industrial and a post-industrial society. The first is that areas such as the Colne Valley, many areas around the country, have been subject to change over the years to accommodate the development needs of the nation, the region, the local area. In this case, one element of change that you have pointed out is the needs of the nation for aggregates, which was met in this area by the extraction of gravel. That's the first point, isn't it?
Correct. And
another thing that we can see is that the needs of nation for transport are reflected in this area through the existence of railway lines and, since the post-war years, the creation of the M25.
Correct.
Yes. But what we also, and HS2 might be seen as another example of that, mightn't it?
It would be adding, yes, you're right, but it would be adding to all those factors that you've raised already. So, to some extent, this area has already seen considerable amount of harm from those factors you've just said, and HS2 Limited is coming in here with yet another great deal of harm in the area.
But the next point you made is that whilst those things were going on, whilst the gravel was being extracted, whilst the railway lines were being constructed, whilst the M25 was being constructed, what you characterise as harm is the inescapable consequences of major construction or development work going on. You can't make an omelette without breaking an egg, can you?
No, that's correct. But if you are making an omelette, do you need to break as many eggs as we're breaking here? Well, and do you end up with a better omelette?
But that leads to the final point: is that you've emphasised the reason why you show this slide is you say one of the things that you can give back to the area is sensitive and skillful restoration once you've carried out the necessary development work to restore as fast as possible, so that you integrate, so that, to use the phrase that the committee used last week, the host gets something back from the guest. Yes?
Yes, if it's deemed that the harm is necessary in the first place.
Well, that decision has been taken by Parliament. Second reading for this bill.
Well, with respect, Mr. Mole, we're talking about the tunnel. So with the tunnel, you remove the harm. So this is a fallback position, isn't it? This is, if there's harm, then yes, you put back. In the case that we have in front of us, we think you don't have to have the harm in the first place. You can avoid the harm, and that should be the first port of call.
Well, I'll come back on it, but assume, for the purposes of my question, that the committee don't require us to construct a tunnel through the Colne Valley. That's a matter for them to decide.
Indeed.
Assume they don't. Your emphasis then would be on the importance of doing the best job that we reasonably can in restoring the Colne Valley landscape and the communities that live in it to the situation once the construction of the railway has been completed. Yeah.
Broadly, although I would say not restore, I would because restoration implies putting back what was like for like. It's got to go beyond restoration.
Well,
but I take the point, yes.
my point to you is this. We heard last week, and it's a commitment that's been given to Hillingdon in the recent letter. We have said we want to set up a Colne Valley Panel Initiative so that there's a collaborative approach between the project and local stakeholders, including Hillingdon, in delivering the best job that we reasonably can for that purpose. That's, say, landscape restoration, integration of the scheme into landscape. That is a vehicle that we can agree, at least in principle, holds out the prospect of achieving with HS2 the same results that you speak of with support, with a positive view, as set out on this slide. That is to say, old gravel pits being restored to valuable recreational facilities.
That's correct. It is a vehicle. Although I would, if I may, I did speak with the CIC at the end of last week, and they had a slight concern about the insurance that's given, and that's in relationship to how proactive and how responsive HS2 Limited would be to their proposals that are brought forward.
Well,
I appreciate the point, Ms. Mould, but I think it is very important to understand that if it is just HS2 Limited proposals that we've seen throughout so far and is concerned by the resident, then that won't achieve what we require. It has to be a two-way process here. It has to be able, our residents and CIC have to be able to come forward with a proposal that can be accepted by HS2 Limited. If that's not the case, then it won't achieve what we both agree should be the outcome.
Well, we're at an early stage in the process. There'll be pitfalls and difficulties along the way. I know it's not your purpose to find fault for the sake of it. You're looking to be constructive, and I think if all parties can agree to try and be constructive, then we're set fair from the position that we've got to now in finding a solution that, as far as possible, is to everybody's satisfaction. In a world in which, as I say, the question of the scheme is going to go through on the viaduct through this area. I'm going to come now.
Sorry, can I just, Mr. Moe, if I may just, on that point, it would be useful, sir, if the assurance could be extended to cover that point that I just made.
Well, we'll take that away and we'll see if we can do something for you in that respect. Right.
Great.
Now let's come back to the point about to your case. Your case, as Mr. Straker said yesterday, is fundamentally that the viaduct scheme through the Colne Valley, which is in the bill, should be replaced by a Colne Valley tunnel scheme.
Correct.
Yeah. There are two broad themes that run through the case for the Colne Valley Tunnel. One is that it would alleviate construction effects on the local area, yes?
Yes.
And the second is it would alleviate the permanent impacts of the viaduct scheme on the local area in terms of things like noise and so forth. Yeah.
Correct.
Can we agree on this, that as a matter of approach, although we are contemplating an extended duration of construction in this area with the viaduct scheme, by 2026, those construction effects will have come to an end, won't they? Because the works will have been completed.
No, because the construction compound at Northolt, main construction compound, stays for a couple of years after that. So,
once the railway has been constructed and come into operation, the construction effects, by definition, will have come to an end, won't they?
well, there would still be. It's 10 years, but yes.
Right. Okay. Now, that being the case, to justify spending hundreds of millions of pounds more on creating a tunnel would need a very special justification in order to offset the effects of construction, wouldn't they?
The effects of construction and the effects of operation.
Yeah, the effects of construction.
Well, we can't.
I'm asking a question about construction. I take your point about operation,
yes.
But I'm asking about construction. If insofar as construction effects are concerned, it's going to have to be a very, very severe and prolonged construction impact to go anywhere towards justifying spending over, shall we say, £250 million on a tunnel, isn't it?
Well, the obvious answer to that is yes, but sir, but if I may, you can't just isolate the construction and the operation. You can't just go construction versus tunnel, operation versus tunnel. Construction plus operation versus tunnel. And I think that does give you, considering the tens of thousands of people in this area, I think that does give you the extraordinary justification required to tunnel this area.
Insofar as
Remind us, the Ruislip tunnel, what did that roughly add into net cost?
I don't know the answer to that on the top of my head. I will
Someone might
find
just
out
know.
for you. Yes. Yeah.
But I think we have picked up the point that it's an extraordinary situation and an extraordinary sum that should be needed for the 6.6 extra kilometres of tunnel. So I think we've got the sort of picture that it's an unusual circumstance.
Yeah. And I'm not going to take too much more time on because I'm going to ask our witnesses to come back on some of these points. But I just want to pursue the question by just testing what you say about the Ruislip depot for a couple of minutes. First of all, you say that you think that TfL and HS2 should sit down and talk about the merits of the TfL depot as an alternative to the Harwell Road railhead and construction site, yeah?
Correct.
Well, we have sat down and talked to TfL about that. I don't know if TfL explained to you that was the position, but we've run through our concerns about the feasibility of constructing the Norfolk Tunnel and fitting out the railway east and west from that location alone. Did you know that?
When did you meet?
We met them. I can't give the precise date. Mr. Smart will explain that, but we have met them certainly well before the Mayor wrote his letter at the end of last week.
Yes, I'm aware that because TfL sat pretty much side by side with HS2, they did discuss some of these issues very early on in the project, and it's been subsequent to that we've worked hard with TfL since their commitment to understanding the legacy benefits of that depot have finally been realised, and it's out of that work that we've realised the possibility of West Ruislip Depot.
And in his letter to the Secretary of State, the Mayor refers to an initial assessment, which is the basis for TfL's advocation of that depot in its letter.
That's correct.
We haven't seen that initial assessment, but the words initial assessment suggests that maybe there's a great deal more work for them to do before they can come to a fully considered view about its merits.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Again, sir, if I may add, there's in terms of the Harwell Road depot, it's fair to say that there's only been an initial assessment of that, hence the assurance given yesterday about a more comprehensive traffic assessment. So in terms of like for like, there are certain issues regarding both. Notwithstanding that, I accept that HS2 Limited have done some work on their scheme, considerable work on their scheme.
Thank you.
But we're not in that position with TfL. We haven't got all the resources that HS2 Limited have. The point I made right at the start, Mr. Mould, if I may, is that this should have been a red flag. This whole construction impact, the whole dumping of material, the whole digging out of the rail, it should have been a red flag, and it should at least prompt HS2 Limited to sit down now with TfL and work through those difficult issues.
Well, Mr. Thine, I hope you'll take from me that the decision to construct the Norfolk Tunnel and to fit out the railway to Euston to the east and well into the Chilterns to the west, so the decision to do that from a dedicated facility at Harwell Road has not been taken lightly. It has been based on a careful consideration of what the alternatives might be. Well, the suggestion is, it may not help, in which case I'll move on.
Well, sir, if I may just come back on that, it may not. You may say it's not been taken lightly, but you've just given us assurance to do more traffic work to see if actually that scheme can be delivered. So I appreciate some work has gone on, but to say that it's been taken lightly, I won't say that. But to say that far more work is required to make sure that it does work, I think that point has to be clear.
Let me put a question which may be of more assistance to the committee. We have, in the pack, is an engineering review of the Colne Valley Tunnel scheme, which has been commissioned by HS2 and which is there to read. Yes.
Correct.
In the pack, there is a detailed review by Parsons Brinkerhoff, commissioned by HS2, on the feasibility of deploying the TfL lands at Ruislip as an alternative to the proposed Harville depot. You've seen that as well.
I wouldn't say it's detailed, sir, because that TfL haven't been given the opportunity to respond to those points.
I think they've had that. They've had that report for some time, and it's in the public domain. There is no other assessment available to the committee on either the on the question of the feasibility of deploying the TfL Ruislip depot as an alternative to the Harville Road depot. Parsons Brinkhoff is the only assessment available for that purpose, isn't it?
Correct, but like I said, there is that was an initial assessment of whether it could be achieved. I think that there is sufficient justification to go back and really question whether or not that initial assessment by Parsons Brinkhoff is correct, with the chance for TfL to respond to it.
And your expert's position yesterday when I asked him questions about this was, I pointed out that our assessment, based on the work we've had done by Parsons Brinkhoff, is that if we were to substitute the TfL depot for the Harville Road depot, we would still need to have a facility at Harville Road to enable us to fit out the railway. And he said, and I said, have you got an alternative for that? And he said no.
Well, I came back on that point this morning, and that question needs to be put to TfL. Parsons Brinkhoff needs to sit down with TfL, and given the difficulty that I was referred to earlier, sir, I think there is justification for coming up with a review in that Parsons Brinkhoff approach. It's not good enough to be in this position, sir, in the project. It's such harm, and not to have a fully thought through alternative from HS2 Limited.
And we can agree that although the numbers may be different, there will be an inescapable need for significant numbers of heavy goods vehicles to travel on the public roads of Hillingdon to get, in order to set up, to construct a depot at the TfL site at Ruislip.
No. I went through this right at the start, sir. There is a fundamentally different amount of traffic required for the two projects. It's not a significant amount of traffic. It's no different from what we would see with other urban projects. We've got supermarkets being built down the road, for example. We point out this is London, so construction traffic does happen. What you're presenting, Mr. Mould, is a unique case. What we're presenting in terms of Ruislip Depot is more the standard case. So it's not to say that they are like for like and one is significant. They both are. One is significant, HS2 scheme. One isn't, TfL scheme.
And the other point I just want to put to you before I leave this over to our witnesses is you emphasise the fact that we are carrying out significant construction works in the green belts. The Ruislip, the land that would be developed for the depot at Ruislip is also greenbelt land, isn't it?
Is also, sorry?
Greenbelt land.
That's correct.
Yes. And so
some of it is the West Ruislip depot.
Yeah.
Some of it is greenbelt land. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. You need to take greenbelt land on either scenario. You need to take
That's
greenbelt
correct.
land.
Yes.
And you, as a planning authority, of course, would require it to be demonstrated that there was a clear need and very special circumstances to justify releasing greenbelt land to create a depot at Ruislip to serve either TfL's needs or our needs or both, wouldn't you?
Well, if it was to go through the normal planning application route, yes, it would.
And that must be the right approach to take. That doesn't change just because it's Parliament that's making the decision rather than the local planning authority.
And again, if we're going to talk about greenbelt, then the Ruislip depot is 20 hectares, give or take, and the area is impacted by HS2 in the greenbelt, getting on for 100 hectares. I think if we're going to weigh up the greenbelt issue, then I think that's plain to. But that's why it's not. That's why it's going down a hybrid bill road, and that's why local planning policy has to be taken into account. But it's a national infrastructure project, so the appropriate amount of weight has to be given.
Finally, just a couple of particular points. If we can just put up P5296, this is just a way of illustrating perhaps that the concerns you raise need to be set in a context. I put this up. This is the position with regard to changes to the public rights of way network once we've completed construction of the railway on the viaduct scheme. Do you see?
Yes.
And I mean, just have a look at that. essentially, the public rights of way network is restored to its existing state, subject to two very limited diversions in order to get round new features associated with the railway. Yeah?
Correct.
And so it shows that although we contemplate during the construction period a very significant, no doubt about it, a very significant construction site at Harville Road, so far as one of the elements you complain about is concerned, that is to say public access, public rights of way, once that work's been completed, effectively no change from the existing.
That's correct.
Thank you.
But if I just may add to that, so that's 10 years after construction starts. So for 10 years, people won't have access to some of these public rights.
I think,
of
as
way.
you know, it's a staged restoration, actually.
I appreciate it, but if you look at the one that we walked on, sir, at the site visit, U49 that goes from back of Brackenbury House through to the other side into the Colne Valley, that's where the main construction compound is for 10 years. So Mr. Gustafsson won't be able to walk on that route. He'll have to walk down Breakspear Road South and then back up the other road. So I take the point, yes, it can be put back, but that's a 10-year period. You know, that's schooling time. You know, that's a child going into adulthood. You know, that's a fairly lengthy time. We can't just dismiss that.
And we've been, as you said, we've been discussing with you, putting forward proposals to try and modify our own proposals for accommodating diversions during the construction period, and you received a letter from us on that a few days ago.
Accepted and grateful for that, subject to the comments I made on Breakspear Road South and being able to actually accommodate what they say they will. They can.
We can continue to talk about
indeed,
that.
Indeed.
Thank you. Just a small point, another registry point on noise. If you just put up P6239, please, because you emphasised the need to take account not only of the ambient noise picture, but also of the maximum noise, the LA max, as it's called in technical terms. And you implied that we hadn't really taken any account of that. Could we just blow this up? It's a familiar table. Just go to the bottom of the table. And as the committee is well aware, of course, our noise assessment considers both overall levels of noise and the degree of change by taking account not just of ambient levels, but also of the maximum levels, doesn't it? You can see that in the table on the...
Well, it doesn't take account of the change in the maximum levels. You'll see that only goes to day-night. So
but it gives you an indication of the maximum noise that the railway would bring to the existing noise landscape based on our predictions.
That's correct, but I didn't say that you hadn't taken them into account. I'm pointing out, sir, that those maximum noise levels are, if you like, poke the head considerably above the averages. And that's all the point I was making, sir, because I don't want to go any further on noise.
No, nor do I. P6208, no, A107410, I think, please. Just on the recreational facilities. I get the wrong reference. I can take the point without the slide. It's A10746, I do apologise. You identify a series of recreational facilities that are affected by the construction and or the operation of the scheme, and we're obviously aware of those. Can we agree, at least in principle, that the objective, the shared objective, must be to continue to seek to accommodate impacts on these facilities and to limit them as far as we reasonably can? Must be right, mustn't it?
Of course, yes.
And we have, as we heard yesterday, we have been working to try and find ways of accommodating the golf courses, haven't we? We've shared expert material with you on that.
That's correct, although I would go back to the point on West Ruislip Golf Course, sir, that it would require some of our funds to make good, in effect.
I said we would talk further about that.
Yes.
When you had your commercial information.
That's correct.
I don't want to talk about HOAC with you now because we're going to hear from HOAC on tomorrow, I think. Can I just ask you for your view on the point I put to your colleague yesterday? Harefield number 2 Lake, if you assume that HOAC is relocated, which is one scenario that is still being considered, that would be a resource that would be available, and the railway's needs would be limited to the presence of a viaduct over that lake, wouldn't they?
Yes, but I would heavily caveat that, sir, because I showed you the noise contours that would be experienced there. I mean, you were talking about 70 decibels plus at the HOAC facilities as they stand at the minute. That makes any use of that lake heavily constrained. It's entirely feasible to have something on there, but the options are significantly limited to the local authority. You certainly, for example, couldn't have any kind of educational facility on there.
Wouldn't that be something that this Colne Valley panel would want to look at carefully and with a positive and constructive perspective to see what the opportunities might be?
Well, indeed.
Thank you.
But on the face of it, it's difficult to see. It's nice to approach everything with a positive mindset, but sometimes you just have to look at it and go, well, we're restricted, we're constrained here.
The viaduct you showed constructed over the Medway, don't people sail under that?
I have no idea, sir. I think in terms of the span is quite extensive for the navigable purposes. So obviously there are boats that go under and whatnot. I think in terms of HS1, the amount of traffic is nowhere near the same as what we're expecting here on this viaduct.
We've all been canvassing in Rochester.
I think a difference is that HOAC has activity of people sailing around there, and on the Medway it's a passage.
Yeah, there's no issue about the fact that HOAC's particular activities are likely to be somewhat constrained if they were to stay or to come back, which is why efforts are being made and continue to be made to try and find them another home. I think the only other point was this: you were concerned that the conveyor arrangements that are proposed to serve the Harbour Road site not being dealt with in the environmental statement. That isn't in fact correct, but rather than take time on that before the committee, if you'd like us to just show you the references, I'm sure we can do that outside.
It is referenced, but it's not. There's no noise assessment, it's not detailed, there's no visual understanding of it, so you're right, it's in there, but it's not in there to the level of detail our residents would have expected.
Thank you.
There's some conveyors going on the railway there behind people's homes, and I think they were generally reassured it didn't make an awful lot of noise. It was a sort of low, fairly low level, but clearly it's an important issue.
Again, sir, it's just another thing in the project that has to be taken into account.
Well, we've made very clear that detailed design is a process that comes next. So I'm not going to. There's a lot on which Mr. Thine and we don't see eye to eye. But rather than take time on that, I'm going to ask Mr. Smart and Mr. Miller to come back on some points, and then obviously it's over to the committee to make its own view on these matters. Yeah.
Mr. Straker.
Can I just ask two matters of Mr. Thine by way of re-examination, please? The first picks up upon the discussion that's just taken place apropos HOAC. Could we please put on the screen P62054? And you'll remember, Mr. Thine, the context of this question was it being suggested, well, once we're up and running with HS2 going across the viaduct and so forth, you'll be able to do things nearby, notwithstanding the trains going past and any noise which the trains produce. 62054, if we perhaps so make it easier for everybody, blow up the middle bit so we can read it slightly more, where it says HOAC operate their outdoor centre. Keep that text. I just want your help for the committee, please, on the range of things which are going on here, because we see that it's prioritising young people, disadvantaged, and those who are disabled. The facilities and usage comprises, and I don't read out everything that's there, but one notices that it includes, amongst other things, the pedal karting barbecue area and a campsite.
Indeed.
That camping activity which takes place there, is that in noise-insulated buildings?
suggest it's just intense.
Intense. And the camping which takes place, does that involve those who we see in the previous text, the young people, the disadvantaged people, and those with disabilities, or sort of just for the able-bodied?
As I understand, it's for all and sundry.
And then we've got staff accommodation chalets there, shelter, race hut, a lecture room, centre office and staff room. Help the committee as far as you're envisaging now, or being asked to envisage, the train going across the viaduct at 320 kilometres per hour, impact there.
I made the point in the opening, sir, that it's difficult to see what could be accommodated on that site. These uses would obviously plainly go, and we would have to find some kind of noise appropriate use that can also get around the many piers in the viaduct. It's perfectly possible, sir, but it's certainly constrained, very restricted. Fish farm. There we go. Fish farm.
Death fish.
Quite noisy,
Well, there are no doubt other noisy things that one can think of as well. Let's go to the other matter I just wanted to touch upon, which was really just, if we take 62491, because you were pressed with the Parsons-Brinkerhoff report as demonstrative of the exercise being undertaken so as to show great consideration of that which has been proposed by Transport for London and London Underground Limited. It should be in this bundle. The numbering, sir, is slightly eccentric in terms of the physical documents, but it comes about 2/3 of the way through. But so you'll be put off, as I think most have been put off, by the fact that they don't run sequentially, all the pages, because of the way it's been put together. But it's there, and this was put on the basis as I've just described. Could you just help the committee, please? We see the date there, the 8th of May 2015.
That's correct.
Has anything prior to that emerged from either this organisation or HS2 apropos this particular matter?
No.
Has anything further emerged as far as demonstrating any consideration of or with Transport for London of what they regard as a suitable alternative location?
The letter yesterday from Mr. Johnson, and also the report that it's references in there.
Anything from HS2?
But nothing from HS2.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. That's all I wanted to ask.
Thank you. Thank you.
66.
Yes.
Which is why I couldn't find it.
Mr. Strawn is going to ask Mr. Smart to come forward and give us a message.
All right.
Yeah.
Mr. Strawn, we'd like to ask Mr. Smart to come.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. Am I done?
Don't ask me, I'm afraid. I'm very far from done, I think I would say.
We get 6204. 6204.
We've clearly given you 3 bottles of water today, so they perhaps know what's in store for you.
Maybe in the way. Are we okay on the view?
So there are a number of topics, Mr. Smart, I'm going to ask you to deal with. I think there are 4 main ones, the first of which is tunnel costs, and in particular the costings that we have put forward, HS2 has put forward, of the London Borough of Hillingdon's tunnel option. And I've just asked to have put up on the screen slide P6204 brackets 44, which is at the end of a tunnel review document. So it's quite a lengthy document, but this summarises some of the cost comparisons between the bill scheme and Hillingdon's tunnel proposal. Is that right, Mr. Smart?
That's correct, yes.
And that identifies the extra overcost of £583.2 million for Hillingdon's tunnel proposal, excluding property costs, which would, I think we looked at yesterday, it's bottom right-hand corner, 66.3 million. So one would deduct that from the 583. So in the region of 500 million more to construct the Hillingdon tunnel proposal.
Yes.
And just because I know that that's controversial, can I just look at it from this perspective of where we got to with Mr. Blaine in terms of
Can you just remind me whether someone got a rough answer to the question I put earlier on as to what the extra net cost was of the Ruislip tunnel, which was added on at some stage?
I'm not sure we've got it yet.
Well, that's a Peter. It was about equivalent. I mean, the key thing that was the driver for putting Ruislip into the tunnel was the amount of surface disruption that the route had going along that corridor. I think it was in the order of 19 bridges would have to be taken out at the abutment and then replaced, including the Piccadilly line. And obviously you've heard about Hanger Lane. So we can have that checked, but I think you'll find that it is about a wash in terms of the surface disruption cost that we would have, and the effects on local stakeholders compared to going under.
The 400.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As the extension, that's right.
The clerk said 6 when people were talking 4 or 5. The clerk's usually right.
We can get that checked.
Okay.
I could get off the top of my head, but I would rather get it checked if you don't.
All right.
He's also got the sort of Damocles hanging over his head, but there would be.
So the gross cost is roughly the same, the net cost was much lower. So
Yes, that's about right.
We'll see if we can get some more information if that would assist. But
not in enormous detail, just trying to get
a broad
balance of
yeah,
why the one. I'm not saying why the one, not the other, but why the one, and then we can sort of help that in our mind.
Would it be? Can I just read out a few lines, which I think will provide part of the answer to your question? This is taken from the document which was published before the bill was introduced into Parliament, explaining the decision to make that change to the then emerging scheme. And it said this: when we considered a tunnelled option in 2010, we estimated that it would cost significantly more than a surface route. We have looked closely at this again, in particular the extensive remodelling of Northolt Junction that a surface route would require. Our study indicates that we previously underestimated the challenges this would present, making it both expensive and disruptive to the Chiltern Line and the West London waste transfer site. Tunnelling would avoid this and the associated high compensation costs. Our study indicates that the additional cost of a tunnel route in this area would be around 40 million to 50 million pounds, much smaller than previously estimated. So there was a trade-off between costs saved and the additional costs that I've just mentioned.
So, were what we had heard of yesterday about the potential additional costs of the tunnel being as low as 60 million, the same kind of considerations might come in, but what we're facing at the moment are rather different considerations.
Absolutely.
And the purposes of the following questions are just to clarify the nature of the dispute as between where we've got to with Mr. Blaine's cost estimates and the 580 or 520 if you take off property costs that is being shown on the slide, just to give an indication of where the difference lies. But can I just recap, Mr. Smart, that I think where we got to, certainly with Mr. Blaine yesterday, is that he started with a £60 to £70 million difference on his estimates, and he accepted that you would need to add on the Park Lodge Farm difference, because that's no longer part of the scheme, which took you up to £120 million. You recall that, Mr. Smart?
Yes.
And he also then accepted that he hadn't costed in the cost of the additional excavated materials necessary for the tunnel, the difference being 500,000 cubic metres at £10 per cubic metre he had taken into account, and the extra, many significant extra, which amounted to a sum of £34 million.
Yes.
So I'm just recapping where we got to yesterday.
It will take the market value.
No, that's a different
that's
point. This
separate.
is just to move
Okay.
the materials, £10 per cubic metre. So that 34 million takes us up to 154. And then there was a debate about the value, as Sir Peter's pointing out, the debate about the value. He agreed it was robust to include a gate fee of £13.50 for that material, which would be £52.7 million extra. The debate then is, if you were able to attribute a value to that, that 52 would be somewhere between 52 and 0, depending upon an existing market for it. But can I just, so that takes us up to 207 million, subject to the point about value. Can I just get you to comment, Mr. Smart, on Mr. Blaine's agreement that it was robust to include that gate fee for the full amount, but just to get your comments on the position as to whether there's a market for this sort of material.
Yes, in the time that we've been developing the design for the hybrid bill and looking at where we could take excavated material, we have never identified a market which would give us any return on that material, other than, of course, using it in our own works where we can do so. I think it was mentioned that we could potentially use the chalk in cement. Well, that, of course, depends on the quality of the chalk. It needs to be of the right silica content. Of the 9 cement production works around the UK, certainly in England, there is one in Scotland at Dunbar and one in Northern Ireland, but of the 9 in the UK that would actually use chalk, they all have their own quarries, except for one, which is at Rugby, which is a Cemex plant, and they actually use their own pipeline to take chalk from a remote quarry there. So I wouldn't have thought they would want to interrupt their own production line to take ours. And even if they did, we would have the cost of getting it there, which is quite a distance. And just to give you an idea of the context, the Lee Valley tunnel that was bought as part of the Tideway scheme, there was no market that they identified to use that chalk. And I understand that the Tideway main tunnels, which are going to be used, the proposal is to take them to by barge off to the Isle of Grain. So just to recap, we have not identified any potential market. On the contrary, we have identified that we are there's a high probability that we'll pay a gate fee.
Now, we've got to 207 million takeaway sum if you assume a market or not. Let's stick with the 207 million for robustness purposes. There's then, in your cost estimates, a difference between PBA and yourselves as to the tunnel systems. And I think in their figures allowed 2.6 million for the tunnel systems, whereas you've identified a figure of some 48.6 million, so a difference of 46 million in the estimates. Can I just get you to comment, Mr. Smart, on which is the more realistic figure for tunnel systems for this type of tunnel?
Well, we have an additional 3 vent shafts and all the plant and equipment that has to go in that. Plus, and perhaps I'll come on to this if we are going to discuss the operational issues of the tunnel, we would have some issues with cooling in a longer tunnel, and that also adds to the cost, which I can come on to perhaps if we are going to discuss the operational and maintenance disadvantages of the tunnel.
So I'm just working our way to where we've got to. I apologise if I've got my maths wrong, but I'm up to 252 million if you assume the figures for tunnel systems you've identified. There then is the TfL depot, and the difference between the parties there is, I think PBA allowed £10 million for the TfL depot, whereas the calculation in this analysis is some £41 million.
Yes.
And which obviously is a difference of an extra 31 million. Could you just explain why it's closer to 41 million than the 10 million allowed by PBA?
Well, we have a significant amount of work to do to create the depot there in terms of putting in the sidings and also creating a level site. That's really where the main element of the cost comes from, and moving well, of course, and moving offices, etc.
We're now at 283 million, and you'll recall yesterday Mr. Blaine recognised, and Mr. Moulds touched on this again, that his proposal, the PBA proposal, doesn't have any provision for fitting out and commissioning the tunnel that's created. And it may sound an obvious question, Mr. Smart, but I assume that that is a necessary part of a creation of a tunnel for an HS2 railway.
Well, without that, you just tend to have a big hole in the ground. So yes, we would have to fit out the tunnel.
And assuming one option which HS2 has identified is the use of Harville Road to create a railhead for systems fit out.
That's correct.
And that is an additional cost of £15 million in your estimate.
Yes.
Which takes us up to 298 million. Have you seen any other proposal from PBA or TfL as to how you would achieve a fit out, or indeed the costs, the implications of how they would do that?
No, I haven't.
We'll come back to that in a moment, but we're now at 298 million. And the other matter Mr. Blaine accepted was the need for a different intervention gap, moving back, if you recall, to West Hyde, where the tunnelling starts. There's a need for the intervention gap. He accepted that his scheme would need to be adjusted for a retained cut for the intervention gap of the size that you identified. And there's obviously a significant cost to that.
There is, yes.
I think in your cost estimates, it's broadly speaking another £110 million difference.
That's correct.
And which takes us up to £408 million extra. And then if one does the analysis between the two costings, you have a greater cost for the tunnel construction, some 73 million more than PBA. And can you just explain that?
Yes, that's really just the cost. I mean, I haven't got full visibility of how PBA costed their tunnels, but in terms of applying our cost to what we believe is their scheme and the civil engineering works that are associated with that, we get a difference of 73 million in terms of how the costing approach on that.
And there are a number, and I hope I can do the exercise if necessary, but I'm not going to go through every item of difference. But you'll see at the bottom there's a time-related costs, indirect costs, value engineering and efficiency saving 37.3 million, which is the figure that goes on the end. We're then up to a figure of about 518 million difference. Could you just please explain, Mr. Smart, why one has the £37 million as part of the calculation?
Yes, that is a prolongation cost of the cost of this work. It's not on the overall length of time to construction and commissioning of High Speed 2, but certainly on the contract itself. And you've got all the indirect costs associated with that. We've got a prolongation of, we believe, 5 to 6 months. That's what that 37 million is about. But it has got built-in HS2 efficiencies, which the committee already know about. So it takes account of all those indirect matters and time-related issues that we have to add on.
Does this these 2 years include contingencies? I mean, clearly, you don't always know what's...
There is no actual set contingency in terms of building in a percentage. This would be just based on estimating tolerances, not adding in a contingency at this stage.
And I'm on my rough arithmetic up to about £518 million difference.
Yes.
And then there are differences between costings on, for example, utility works, which lead us to, if one goes through the detail, would account for the difference between 518 and 580 million. So there's some differences in how one costs those utility works and other
Yes, that's right.
Other associated works.
There's miscellaneous items that are costed utilities, and taking a realistic view of utilities in our view, that accounts for that difference, which makes up to the 583, which is around about £67 million in terms of that whole scheme.
And if one then deducts, as I indicated, the property costs of 66 million, you're in the region of 520 million, subject to some give and take as in the calculations that we've just gone through. The broad cost being a difference of 520 million. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Can I just ask you about the tunnel cost guide? Because yesterday Mr. Blaine introduced a cost estimate referring to the tunnel cost guide, which he said for a 7-kilometre tunnel, the total cost of a 7-kilometre tunnel under that guide would be about £491 million. And I think he was suggesting that means what's being shown here for a 6.6 kilometre tunnel is very much greater in terms of costs. But can you just explain the difference between using the tunnelling guide for the cost of a tunnel and what's actually costed here by way of a cost comparison?
Yes. Well, of course, we did highlight one of the dangers of a tunnelling ready rector is that you can put the costs together and they don't apply to the particular circumstances that you have in front of you. But nevertheless, it is what it says, which is a guide. And the 491 million is actually more, I think, than PBA have valued their own tunnel works. But of course, that cost for a 7-kilometre tunnel is light of some of the things that we believe are required to make a tunnel solution work. Most obviously, the amount of civil engineering and excavation work required for that intervention gap, which we spoke about, of another additional vent shaft, which is not in that cost, which is required for the systems, and indeed the provision of a railhead. Those are the sort of things which would not be in the cost that you would get from the ready rector, if I can use that term, for the tunnelling cost guide.
I'm going to move to a different topic now of the four.
Can I just ask a question? The issue of tunnel was raised, and having construction sites at West Hyde and at West Ruislip, doing away with Harbour Road railhead, which you're saying Alliance needs. We'd still need that because you have the fitting out, the cabling, all the other stuff that you have to do within a railway. If you had no tunnel but a surface railway, could you still build it from West Hyde and West Ruislip and get rid of the Harbour Road base? I mean, I assume there's maybe difficulties, but would that make it easier to change?
We would still have a route through going through Ruislip, which we would still be going through
the trace.
The trace, yes. Yeah. So that would still demand a heavy amount of traffic on the roads, because you still have a trace that looks substantially like ours does before you, of course, go into tunnel at our portal on the hybrid bill scheme. So you would not eliminate the amount of traffic, and since, as we'll probably come on to, the excavated material from our tunnelling goes out by the railhead via rail. If we didn't have that there, then arguably you might have other issues on traffic on the roads.
Can I pick up the point which was raised a little while back about the traffic on the Chiltern line, and that from Harwell Road there were problems going west? Is that, and it might, the stuff coming out of there might have to go east before it goes out?
That's about the shunting being in the depot, yes, sir.
Yeah.
But really, I think when we come to, and perhaps we might come on to it later when we look at some of the slides, the issue with the Chiltern line is the amount of train paths that you can get when you look at all the demands that we would be using for either taking away excavated material, bringing in tunnelling supplies, and then, of course, the particular issue you're talking about is accessing our trace with our works trains that are required for the fit out of the tunnel, which would have to go further west by about 2.5 kilometres and then off the Chiltern line and then onto our trace. And all of that would be competing with, of course, passenger trains at about the same time that we'd be trying to get our works trains across the Chiltern line.
Well, we're going to come back to that, Mr. Smart, but what you were describing is if one were to use TfL, the TfL site would have that additional interaction with the Chiltern main line. that you've just described, the additional shunting difficulty onto the main line. Is that, have I understood what you were saying?
That's right. So what we would have to do is put in another connection from the TfL depot, which will allow us to go out. But coming in from one direction, we still have to do a shunting move.
Thank you. Mr. Smart, you may just have to keep your voice up because you've got your back to people behind.
Oh, sorry.
And I understand that there's difficulty hearing.
All the banging and crashing.
Even in this row.
I'll move a bit nearer the microphone and see if that helps.
We'll come back briefly to the, well, we're about to, in fact, let's deal with it now. The second topic I just wanted to cover with you is the use of the TfL depot.
Yes.
And can we just look at it in two chunks? The first issue is the use of the TfL depot as suggested by Hillingdon to support a tunnel proposal which they're proposing. And I think we can probably best do this by just putting up on screen P6520 brackets 18. And just for the context, that's at the end of a set of slides which considers the use of the TfL depot, both with our scheme but also for a tunnel. But I want to take the tunnel first.
Yes.
So P6250 brackets 18. And just for context, Mr. Smart, this is in a circumstance where one is tunnelling under the Colne Valley and, of course, tunnelling with the Northolt Tunnel. You're tunnelling the Colne Valley Tunnel under Hillingdon's proposal from West Hyde, but you also have to tunnel the Northolt Tunnel. And the proposal, as I understand it from the TfL depot, is to tunnel the Northolt Tunnel from a vent shaft based at the TfL depot.
That's the proposal as I understand it, yes. So this would be to drive the Northolt Tunnel, our Northolt Tunnel, which we of course do from our Harville Road site and our portal from this site.
Yeah. Now, this slide identifies that it's physically possible, unfeasible due to programme and cost impacts. And Mr. Moore went through this with Mr. Blaine yesterday. There are a number of difficulties that are identified here. Perhaps the most obvious in light of what Mr. Blaine said yesterday, and I could just ask you to comment upon, is, of course, that there is nothing in this proposal that explains how you would carry out the 4-year fit-out of the tunnel once constructed by way of a systems fit-out.
That's right.
Yeah. So we need to come back to that in a moment. But can you just deal with the principle of using the TfL depot site to construct the Northolt Tunnel, what this actually means and whether it's possible?
Yes, it is possible, but it is, there are significant risks attached with it. What you're doing here is sinking a shaft, which is shown, and then the red lines which go out onto the running tunnels would actually be adits which connect into what would be the Northolt Tunnel, which we'd be driving towards the east. Now, this means that the tunnelling machine that would do that would have to be lowered down the shaft and erected underground rather than you would normally do it in either a diaphragm wall or at a portal. So you will recall the presentation given by Professor Robert Mayer on settlement, and he showed a long section in that presentation. And the Northolt portal is at the area where you're heading towards the chalk from London Clay, and you're heading up towards what was termed the Lambeth beds, which are water-bearing granular material. Now, in order to form a cavern, the normal way of doing this, of course, would be what Crossrail, in fact, have been doing, which is using SCL or sprayed concrete lining, which, of course, requires stand-up time from the material that you are tunnelling in. Now, if the competency that it'll stand there and not fall over without positive support being on there for a period of time. Now, if this is water-bearing granular material, there is a difficulty in forming those adits. You can probably get the shaft down, but those adits would be difficult. Furthermore, in order to erect the machine underground, you would need to form a cavern bigger than the machine and long enough to erect the machine in. So on the line of the tunnel there, you would need to form a cavern that would have to be in the order of 12 to 14 metres in diameter and about 150 metres long, underground. And that, of course, is quite a task to do. If you could not successfully create those adits because of the water-bearing and granular issues with the ground, you could not potentially use the SCL method, you would then have to resort to using a box similar to we do at Green Park Way, where you drive diaphragm walls from the surface. Now the problem then, of course, is that the line of the tunnel is on the line of the Chiltern line, so you would not be able to get the box in. So whilst I do understand the proposal to tunnel from here, for me it has significant risks attached.
Heroic.
I think that's a very good term, Sir Peter.
Now, you've explained the tunnel, the creation of the tunnel boring machine underground. If one does that and is able to do that, and the tunnelling begins into the North Holt Tunnel, the proposal is to extract the excavated material onto the TfL depot site and then have your concrete segment plant on that site as well,
yes,
feeding the tunnel as it goes through the North Holt Tunnel. Feeding your machine, as it goes through the North Holt Tunnel.
Yes, you would be having to feed the machine logistics down the shaft, which would be taking segments down the shaft and then moving them along the adits to the machine. And at the same time, you'd have to be bringing excavated material up from the tunnel drives, which would be coming up a vertical shaft via a hack, which is a sort of vertical conveyor. So it's logistically more difficult than coming straight out on an inclined conveyor, probably similar to that you would have seen on the Crossrail sites.
Now, can I just because we've got to compare light with light, if one were to do this, this is just for the construction phase, one obviously has to have a depot in order to do that. You have to create the sidings, create the concrete batching, manufacturing plants at the TfL depot, and that is where yesterday Mr. Mould asked Mr. Blaine about the creation of such a depot, the level of traffic it would create and how that traffic would be on roads, not on rail.
Yes, correct.
And Mr. Blaine agreed in order to set up such a site you would have to use HGV traffic to bring in the materials because you don't have sidings in place. And can I just get an idea from you, Mr. Smart, as to whether Mr. Blaine was right to accept it would be of a similar order of HGV traffic as that which is involved in the Harville Road setup?
Yes, a similar order. It might be potentially a slightly less period of time, but it would be a similar order, so you'd be just substituting the traffic issues onto a different road in the area.
We'd be substituting onto West End Road, which Mr. Knowles yesterday confirmed was the more congested. I think it's a red hot spot rather than a green or orange.
I think that was the suggestion, yes.
Yeah. So we're now... I'll come back to just the nature of the TfL depot site in a moment. If one's able to do all those things and construct your railhead, you're taking excavated material out by rail with your sidings in place. But as Mr. Blaine accepted, there's no proposal here to fit out the tunnel. That's a 4-year period where you're fitting out the tunnels. And of course, the Harville Road railhead, as was explained, is to fit out not just the North Holt Tunnel, but to fit out the other way as well.
That's correct.
Yeah. And there's no proposal put forward by Hillingdon, or indeed, have you seen one from TfL as to how one would fit out the tunnels from this location?
No, the only proposal that was put forward was to somehow connect the TfL depot onto the Chiltern line and then travel the 2.5 kilometres down it and then onto our trace via another turnout and connect to the trace down there.
Yeah. So this is looking at the Colne Valley tunnel creation, and I just want to stick with that idea. HS2 has proposed that if you were to do this, to create a tunnel, you would still need the Harville Road railhead to create that in that location in order to carry out the fit out.
That's correct.
And that is, the effects of doing that are shown, just so we be clear, on P6222. Which is coming up on screen, and I put this to Mr. Knowles yesterday, but just if you can explain, see if I've got it right, Mr. Smart. This is, in effect, the only solution that HS2 have been able to identify, assuming one is tunnelling in this area. The only railhead that could provide the same fit-out processes that are required is to have a railhead in the location of Harwell Road, with the creation of the cavern that's shown on the screen just there,
yes,
just above the arrow.
I'm pointing to it now. So here, the railhead would move slightly towards the west, and we would then create a cavern which connects the tunnel with the surface railhead, so that we can get engineering trains down into the tunnels. And then they would have to then do a reversing move if they were going north to fit out, more west to fit out the Chiltern tunnels, and then go straight on if they were going to fit out the rest of the Northolt and Euston tunnels.
And I don't think it's in dispute that if this solution is adopted, then one has effectively the same traffic impacts on the roads as would occur with the bill scheme, or broadly speaking, the same spike in traffic activity.
Broadly speaking, the figures are on the exhibit, but you have got a heavy traffic because you've still got significant earthworks to have to form a railhead, and the railhead that's required for fit-out has slightly more sidings than they do for the earth-moving configuration, and you have the additional earthworks to create the only way we believe we can get the tunnels away is an enlarged vent shaft at F to lower the machines from a shaft box and not from trying to erect them underground. And then, of course, there's the earthworks involved in forming that adit down to connect the running tunnel to the surface.
Mr. Thine, I think, on a number of occasions talked about avoiding this with his tunnel proposal and avoiding the cutting in the Copthall area that comes with the bill scheme. And I think what you're saying is, you just told us that this would still be necessary. I think one of his points was that you create sidings in the Copthall area which are then taken away in the permanent phase. There is actually shown on the plans a maintenance siding which is created under our scheme, which remains in place as a product of putting in the railhead and cutting in that location.
Yeah, that's correct. We have about a 200-metre siding there, because with the amount of tunnels we've got under the existing scheme, let alone any other extension to tunnels, there is a lot of mechanical and electrical plant that's required to be maintained, and therefore we have a strategic location for maintenance of the tunnels at that location. So that siding that's created for both earth moving from our tunnels and for the fit-out of our tunnels is also used in the permanent case for maintenance.
Now, no other proposal has been put forward from Hillingdon or TfL, but can I just get you to contemplate, Mr. Smart, the feasibility of fitting out from, say, the TfL depot through the vent shaft that's being created? Is it realistic to fit out a railway of this kind through the vent shaft on the TfL depot?
No, in my view, it is not realistic, because the first thing you have to do, of course, is create the concreting for the base of the track form and the walkways and derailment containment, which involves travelling shutters, and then installing rails which are 200 metres long, unless you have to cut them up and then do more welding. Whilst you might be able to do that from the shaft, it's quite a time-consuming process, but then you have to come on to the other fit-out that we have to do. To my mind, it would be a little bit like decorating your hall through your letterbox. So you have to use engineering trains because you have a number of cables to run. You are working at height for the overhead line equipment, A tunnel proposal has cross passages. You have cross passage doors to install. These are quite hefty pieces of kit, and you need two per cross passage and one on each of the tunnels. So the only really way you can do this is to have engineering trains. So without a railhead at this location, and if we had an extended tunnel, we'd be fitting out about 34 kilometres worth of tunnel and having to run engineering trains from Calvert, and that would have a significant programme impact, which wouldn't just go in terms of a prolongation of the cost of our tunnel scheme out from London. It would go to the overall delay on the High Speed 2 project.
That's not a cost that's in the 582 million additional.
No.
Can I then move away? I said two issues to cover. TfL depot for a tunnel scheme. Can we just deal with the use of TfL depot in our scheme and the consideration that's been given to that? So that's assuming no tunnel option across the Colne Valley, our scheme, but using the TfL depot in substitution for Harville Road.
Yes. Could I just make one point, though, Mr. Strachan, before we leave this slide? This slide here, of course, is only dealing with the traffic, which would impact, if you like, the Ickenham end of the of tunnelling the Colne Valley. You would have a traffic impact at the West Hyde end from such a tunnel, and that's not shown on this traffic map. But there would be a significant amount of additional material to deal with at the M25 end.
There is a slide which shows the amount of excavated material, additional excavated material, would generate 920,000 HGV movements at West Hyde, and an additional 920,000 movements at West Hyde onto the M25. Is that?
That's the figure that we have for the amount of material that would need to be handled, yes.
So moving away from the tunnel proposal, could I ask you just to put on screen P62501, and I don't ask you to go through all these slides, but there is a sequence of slides up to 625017, which summarise the position in light of that Parsons-Brinkerhoff report we referred to. It was up on screen a moment ago. Can I just by way of background, Mrs. Mark, has HS2 had meetings with TfL to consider the use of the TfL depot
yes.
as part of our scheme?
Yes. There were presentations made to TfL on the use of their depot. I certainly had a meeting with TfL myself, which followed, I can't give you the date right off the top of my head, sir, but within a couple of weeks of the committee site visit to Victoria Road, which I think was the 6th of May. I'm sure the clerk can confirm that. So I had a meeting with TfL around about end of May, I should imagine.
And if we just look at P6250 bracket 6, and for present purposes, so I'm not going to go to the Parsons-Brinkerhoff report. It's in detail in the pack if one needs to refer to it. But I'm just going to get the summary of the conclusions on the TfL depot alternative option. And the number of conclusions were reached about this, Mr. Smart. The first is you would still require West Ruislip railhead for a rail systems fit-out.
Correct.
And can you just explain why that is?
Well, if you don't have...
It's a way of opening the door rather than going through the left box.
Yes, that's simply put.
Same point. Then you identify there's the impracticability for tunnel support, which you've also covered, the increase in capital costs, which is part of the costing arrangements, then would have an adverse impact on residence roads and rail network and would require construction in the green belt and a local wildlife site. If we could just look at A1073 brackets 5. you can see, I've just pointed out on the screen, the area that we're talking about is down here. The white notation indicates a nature conservation site, and the hatched is the green belt. So the area of land that would be necessary to take for the TfL depot, it's not actually part of the TfL depot, it is a nature conservation site and green belt adjoining a residential area down here.
Yes,
Which are some of the factors that were looked at in the report.
that's correct.
Yeah. And it's also fair to say that I think it's identified that I think maybe a third of it is not actually owned by TfL. There's a plan which shows that A106443. So it's
Yes,
land
there is a
else.
section of third-party land that would have to be used if that was to be a realistic option.
That really covers the consideration given to use of TfL depot.
I'll just do this. Right. So 624959. They found a bat. It's good for newts. And there are other things as well.
Yes, I took that rather shortly, but that's no doubt consistent with it being a nature conservation site. But there were specific habitats issues that would arise. I'm going to move on to the third of four topics very quickly. Mr. Smart, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but there appears to be a dispute between you and Mr. Blaine about the operational advantages of a tunnel versus a viaduct scheme. Mr. Blaine claimed there were maintenance benefits of having a tunnel versus a viaduct, and he claimed there were potential journey time benefits. Can I just get you very briefly to comment on why you disagree?
Yeah, there's absolutely no benefit in my mind at all. What happens with the tunnel scheme is you have much more plant and equipment that requires maintenance, so your maintenance burden is much heavier, your life cycle costs are much greater. There is a journey time impact because, as the committee may recall, due to fire safety reasons, you cannot have more than one train in a vent section. So because of the additional vent shafts that we require, there is a small impact on journey time. Plus, as the committee will also recall from earlier presentations, there's an increase in traction power requirements because of the track. So apart from the three vent shafts and the mechanical and electrical equipment that we have, we also have a potential issue with both air quality and cooling. Air quality is something that we would have to look at more closely, but certainly we believe a tunnel of the length that we're now proposing, with the addition of a tunnel at the Colne Valley, would require us to put active cooling into the tunnel to keep the temperatures below 35 degrees, which is the optimum that we need, both for passenger comfort and indeed for maintenance workers in the tunnel. So we would have to put pipes into the tunnel, and these are loops, and we would require something like 7 cooling chillers at various strategic locations, which of course also requires maintenance. And the other thing, and most importantly, is this goes to the heart of resilience of the railway. All of this mechanical and electrical plant that is required to keep the tunnel safe with fans and etc. Is controlled by a ventilation control system. It's a sophisticated piece of software. If that ever fails, you cannot pass trains through because you could not guarantee the safety of passengers in the event of an emergency evacuation. Added to which, as I've already mentioned, you've got addition of cross-passage doors. So all of this requires additional maintenance, whereas on a viaduct, of course, you have the overhead line and the railways as you would have normally on a rail, which you would inspect, but you don't have all the other plant and equipment. Yes, you have some pumps potentially, but the civil engineering structures do not need anything like the same rigorous maintenance and inspection regime as mechanical plant and equipment.
Thank you. And finally, can I just, because you've dealt with the traffic effects in your answers already of the two different options, can I just take you to A1068 brackets 8 and, if necessary, 9, but let's start with 8. And this is just the final point, Mr. Smart, because I think you'll be able to comment on this. This is Mr. Thine's reference to the Medway, the creation of the Medway viaduct, and I think drawing a parallel with the Colne Valley Viaduct. Could you just comment on that, please?
Well, yes. It's not strictly appropriate. Well, I think what you've got there, first of all, is the main motorway is being widened as well, which you can see going on in the background. This is the central section of the Medway. That was a box girder bridge. Now, that central section is much, much bigger than the viaduct we're proposing. The construction method is different. That central head was a balanced cantilever in situ construction. It's 152 metres wide. It's 24 metres, if I recall correctly, from the high water mark, and the variation in water there is about 4 metres. It's a tidal range. So I guess what I'm saying is that is a much more extensive construction than you would see on our viaduct, which is much lower. And we would use that actually is showing an in situ balanced cantilever arrangement, which is why you've got tall tower cranes, and the more extensive temporary works to one side of it, because that needs, of course, to be much bigger.
Mr. Smart, can I just, before I leave you to questions, ask you just to clarify that we lapse into jargon sometimes in this giving evidence, but you refer to an adit, and I'm sure many of you know what adits are, but there are many who won't. So can you just explain, when you were describing the creation of
yes.
the use of the TfL depot, you talked about the creation of adits. And can you explain just what those are?
Yes. Could we just go back to the slide which showed the TfL depot with the...
yeah, that was...
And it is just as well you corrected me, Mr. Stratton, because I need to point out something, I think, as well on that slide.
This was...
but while we find it, an adit...
6250 brackets 18.
An adit is another term in this case for a temporary tunnel. So it is something that you would construct for access reasons. It comes from mining rather than tunnelling. But perhaps I should point out that, of course, in the PBA proposal, as far as I understand it, they are assuming that vent shaft would be used in the permanent scheme for ventilation. So in this case, although the adits is a correct term in terms of the tunnelling, because they are a temporary access to get the machine built underground.
So they're tunnels in themselves, but
yeah.
they're temporary access tunnels.
But I think PBA are also proposing that this is a vent shaft, and if that is the case, then there is a major issue with ventilation because it's offset by some distance. So we would have to put much more significant plant and equipment in there than we would normally have, even if you could in fact do that from the smoke vent control.
Thank you very much. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Strong. Mr. Strait.
Thank you very much. Could we first just have a look at, please, A106447. And Mr. Smart, this is part of the presentation that was made yesterday, and I think I'm right in saying, aren't I, that it wasn't you who've conducted on behalf of HS2 discussions with Mr. Bruce Blaine, but another.
Yes.
One of your colleagues.
Correct.
And one of your colleagues with your knowledge and assent.
Yes.
And one of your colleagues who reported back to you as to what was happening.
Yes.
And one of your colleagues who told you what was agreed and what was disagreed.
Yes.
Yeah? And we can see, can't we, that those issues there identified were agreed.
I think we can.
Yes. So if we take the bottom one first, the operational speed, journey time, passenger experience is as good as the hybrid bill scheme.
Well, I think you have to take that in the round. There is a journey time impact, there is no doubt. When this was stated, I don't know if the modelling had been done in terms of one vent shaft, one train between vent sections. But I think what we are saying here is that for the purposes of evaluating schemes, the journey time is not necessarily a big issue. Some may take issue with my view on that. It is 30 seconds, and I know timetablers, and there is a value to that. And the operational speed, of course, can be maintained, but that means that you would have to have a higher fraction power demand.
The design speed of a tunnel for HS2 and the design speed of this tunnel would be 320 kilometres.
I think just to save us time and you bother, we'll assume that a passenger on a train would go roughly the same speed. If you have many trains, things become more complicated, as Mr. Smart was explaining. Yes. But if we take the first part, we'll accept that.
Very well. Well, I'll take it on then slightly further in that way, just so that we get the point clear in our minds. The speed over the viaduct is affected, isn't it, by the curvature of the lines as they approach the viaduct.
Yes.
And that curvature of the lines...
Yesterday, early on, I think we remember that the equivalent speeds were accepted. But there are different schemes, different curvatures, but the same speed for different reasons.
Very well.
Yes, correct. I mean, in the round, we are saying that yes, you can achieve an alignment and a speed either on either scheme, which would be acceptable to what we require.
Very well. Well, let's just then move to this matter, please, if we may. I think, Mr. Smart, it was you who gave, earlier in the course of the proceedings of this committee, some evidence to the committee about tunnelling and why one should tunnel.
Yes.
And you mentioned that there were 3 reasons why one should tunnel, and you went through those, including the fact of terrain.
Yes.
And the terrain, when one bears that in mind, may be because it's excessively hilly, or it may be because one's concerned about water.
Yes.
Yes. There's also, you said, the issue of surface disruption, that is to say, disruption to existing infrastructure and people.
Yes.
And so that takes account of the fact, as we've seen, that when you were travelling through the densely packed urban areas adjacent, you found it prudent to go in a tunnel.
Yes.
Yes. And the existing infrastructure and people will, of course, include, won't it, the infrastructure which those people who live in the immediate vicinity and those people who live nearby actually use, the recreational facilities and matters of that sort.
Correct.
Yes. And one also notes that I don't think that you referred to, did you, the environmental consequences of tunnelling compared to having it at grade?
I think we did talk about the fact that tunnels do pass under environmentally important areas, but I don't think it was stressed, perhaps, as a major point.
And the other matter I think you mentioned was connectivity, recognising that a tunnel can have an improved point as far as connectivity is concerned because it's not going to interfere above ground.
Yes.
Indeed, one doesn't have to go in far in London to realise what the effects of underground trains translated to the surface would be. Devastating. Now, can we then spend a moment or two, please, if you don't mind, in looking at the SIFT report at 6203, and this is a report, isn't it? If we get to 602031, which was undertaken for the purpose of considering a northern extension of the Northolt Tunnel and was reissued, I think, as recently as the 9th of June 2015.
Yes.
And if we go, please, to 62035 within that, we can see what was done in this report. That is to say, certain options 116 were assessed and compared against the proposed scheme as set out in the hybrid bill. Option B and option C are there recorded, but this was a subsurface alignment simply going under where the viaduct presently is proposed to travel.
Yes.
Yes. And so this wasn't, in fact, referable to, strictly, the tunnel proposed by the London Borough of Hillingdon.
No, not strictly.
But, of course, much of the material contained within it, which is no doubt why you've put it in to the committee, would be referable to the circumstance obtaining on the London Borough of Hillingdon tunnel.
Yeah, up to a tunnel scheme, yes.
Yes. And if we look on within it, we get to 620355, please. And we can observe, can't we, that we are within a tabular layout which in fact is seeking to travel through various matters which arise by way of an environmental appraisal.
Yes.
Yeah? And we can notice, can't we, that at the foot of page 620355, the indications are given as to what would constitute a major improvement on the comparator scheme.
Yes.
The green with the 3 pluses. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then if we go to 620354, please. We have an overall rating which is provided, and we see that in the option B, which is a tunnel option, for the overall rating we get 3 pluses and a green. Yes? So that is a major improvement, a tunnel compared to the viaduct.
Well, like all things, you're looking at a balance here of what can be achieved between a surface scheme and a tunnel scheme. And I don't think we've ever suggested that the tunnel scheme doesn't come with certain advantages for environmental reasons. It does come with other disbenefits. But again, I would come back to the point that there's always a balance between what is the cost that you can achieve, the mitigation that the significant effect or improvement would give you.
But I am reading this document correctly, aren't I, when it's recording that the overall rating which is being given to a tunnel compared to a viaduct is that it is a major improvement.
I think that's right. I can't recall every page of this document and whether that is the final conclusion of all the information in the SIFs, but I'm assuming for the purposes of this conversation that's correct.
Yes. And then if we just read the text as to what is being stated, as to why the author was coming to that conclusion, the option, that's to say the tunnel option, would avoid the majority of the above-ground impacts identified in option A during, and then I put in the word both construction and operation. We see that text, yes?
Yes.
Including indirect impacts as a consequence of utility diversions. Is there any reason to suppose that this document, put in for the assistance of the committee, would be different if it was the London Borough of Hillingdon's tunnel rather than the tunnel here being considered?
Yeah, there is a difference because the London Borough of Hillingdon's PBA appraisal has things in it which we need to do to make the scheme work, and therefore this isn't a direct representation. So whilst you can say this is applicable to a tunnel scheme, it wouldn't directly be referable to some of the impacts that the PBA one might have in terms of, particularly, traffic on the road.
Very well. Well, we can come to that. We can look on, see what the text says. The additional tunnelling will generate significant volumes of additional spoil. And so the authors of this document were alive to a point of criticism which is made against the London Borough of Hillingdon's tunnel, namely the generation of spoil.
Yes.
And nonetheless arrived at, in terms of the comparison, a major improvement on the comparator scheme.
Correct.
Yes. And then if we just look on the same document, but we just cast our eyes slightly higher up, we can see that a point was being made about waste and material resources before the overall rating was done. It's on the same page, page 54. And we can notice, can't we, that the point is taken against this tunnel under consideration was that there would be a large quantity of excavated material, and it then goes on to say, since the tunnel also removes the need for engineering fill material and mitigation earthworks, this would substantially increase the total volume of excavated material generated. Do you see that text?
Yes.
And you make the same criticism, don't you, of the London Borough of Hillingdon's tunnel?
Well, what I say is the London Borough of Hillingdon's tunnel, to make it work, does require significant earthworks at the Northolt end.
And the reason why you make that criticism is you say there's going to be a large quantity of excavated material, there's a lot of digging involved, and you're going to have to remove material. That's the character of the criticism, isn't it?
We would have to remove material under the London Borough of Hillingdon scheme from both ends, both at the Harbour Road end to make the scheme work from the point of view of fit out and the railhead, as I've already suggested, and of course there is the small matter of the 920,000 vehicles that would go via the M25 for taking out the tunnel at the other end. So how you refer that to this particular thing, I don't know, but that is actually the position that we find ourselves in with respect to the London Borough of Hillingdon tunnel scheme.
Of course.
For lunch. Is it appropriate for you? Would you like
no, sir, I'm perfectly happy, sir, and that's, if that's convenient for you, it's convenient for me necessarily.
As there's only three of us, I think if somebody's got something on outside, then
yes.
we have a problem. So I think what we'll do, we'll adjourn now till 2 o'clock.
Thank you very much
for your cooperation.
Thank you.
Order.